Olivia had planned too many weddings to believe in perfect days. Something always went wrong. A florist arrived late. A groom lost his cufflinks. A bridesmaid cried in a bathroom. A ring bearer developed a sudden fear of aisles. She had built a career out of smiling through disasters and fixing them before anyone important noticed. But her own wedding morning had behaved itself. The suite smelled of white roses and warm hairspray. Sunlight washed over the polished floor. Downstairs, the quartet was practicing, the cello notes drifting up faintly through the hotel like a promise. Every candle, ribbon, place card, and petal was exactly where she had asked for it to be. For once, there was nothing left to fix. Harper stood behind her, lifting the ivory train with careful hands so the satin would not drag against the floor. "I still cannot believe this is happening," Harper whispered. Her voice was soft, half laugh and half almost tears. "You are really getting married." Olivia looked at herself in the full-length mirror and had the strange feeling that she was seeing someone else. The gown fit perfectly. Lace skimmed her waist before falling into layers of tulle. Tiny pearls caught the warm light across the bodice. Her veil lay over her chestnut curls, which had been pinned into a graceful knot at the nape of her neck. She looked calm. Elegant. Like a bride from one of the weddings she usually watched from the edge of the room with a clipboard in hand. Today, the bride was her. Mrs. Olivia Sinclair. The thought made her breath catch. Harper came to stand beside her reflection and tucked a loose curl behind Olivia's ear. "So," she said, giving her a teasing little smile, "you are still disgustingly in love with Nathaniel?" Olivia's smile came before she could stop it. "Yes." "No last-minute panic?" "No." "Not even a tiny one?" Olivia looked down at the diamond on her left hand. "We've been together 2 years, Harper. He still remembers my coffee order from the morning we met. He sends peonies to my office when I have a difficult client. He knows I get anxious before every wedding, even other people's weddings, and he calls before the ceremony just to tell me I have everything under control." Her cheeks warmed. "He makes me feel chosen. Every day." Harper's playful expression softened. "I have seen the way he looks at you. When you walk into a room, he forgets anyone else is there." Olivia lowered her eyes, embarrassed by how much she liked hearing it. "I know," she said quietly. A knock came at the heavy oak door. Before Olivia could answer, it opened a few inches and Rebecca Bennett stepped in. Her mother stopped so abruptly that one hand flew to her chest. "Oh, Olivia." Her eyes filled at once. Olivia laughed, though emotion tightened her throat. "Mom, no. Not yet." Rebecca crossed the room and pulled her carefully into her arms, mindful of the veil, the dress, the makeup. She smelled like lavender perfume and setting spray, a scent so familiar it made Olivia feel 6 years old and grown all at once. "You look beautiful," Rebecca whispered. "I have pictured this day since the minute they put you in my arms." "Please do not make me cry," Olivia said, waving a hand in front of her face. "If my makeup goes, yours is coming with it." "No promises," Harper said, already holding out a tissue. The three of them laughed. And for that brief, bright moment, Olivia felt completely steady. She had spent months building this day until every part of it reflected the life she thought she was walking into. This was not another event. This was not a job. She was not the planner in black, checking timelines from the shadows. This was hers. In less than an hour, she would walk downstairs. Nathaniel would be waiting at the altar. He would smile that quiet smile of his, the one that made her feel as if the rest of the world had gone silent. She would take his hand, say her vows, and begin the life they had promised each other. Everything was ready. Everything was perfect. And miles away from the hotel, Nathaniel Sinclair was not on his way. 3 hours later, perfection had curdled into dread. The reception hall had gone too quiet. The bright, expectant chatter from earlier had faded into tense whispers that moved through the crowd in little waves. Guests stood in clusters with champagne they had stopped drinking, glancing at the empty altar and then away again, as if pretending not to notice might make the groom appear. He had not called. He had not texted. He had not arrived. In the foyer, William Sinclair paced across the marble with his phone pressed hard to his ear. His face had gone rigid, the controlled mask of a man who was used to commanding rooms and bending problems into shape by sheer force. This problem would not bend. The call clicked to voicemail. William ended it and dialed again. "Pick up," he muttered. "Damn it, Nathaniel, pick up." Near him, Caroline Sinclair looked close to breaking. Her silk dress remained flawless, but tears had cut through her makeup. She held her own phone in both hands, dialing again and again with trembling fingers. "Nathaniel," she whispered when the call began to ring. "Please, darling. Please answer your mother." It went to voicemail. Again. Caroline stared at the screen as if it had betrayed her. "This is not like him," she said, turning to William. "You know it is not. He would never leave Olivia standing there. He would not do this to our family. Something has happened." William had no answer. For once, the great William Sinclair looked helpless. Upstairs, the bridal suite had grown cold. Olivia sat before the vanity mirror, still dressed in lace and pearls, still made up like a woman minutes away from marriage. Nothing about her appearance had changed. That was the cruel part. Her dress remained spotless. Her veil was still smooth. Her bouquet of white roses rested in her lap, gripped so tightly that the thorns had begun to bite into her palms. Only her eyes had changed. The light from the morning was gone. "Breathe," she told herself. "Nathaniel is coming. There is an explanation. He loves me." Each silent minute made the words harder to believe. Chloe knelt beside her and wrapped both hands around Olivia's cold fingers. "Do not go to the worst place yet," Chloe said gently. "His phone might be dead. There could have been an accident on the highway. Maybe someone is already trying to reach us with news. There has to be a reason." Olivia nodded. The movement felt mechanical. "I know," she whispered. She did not know. By the cracked door, Charles Bennett stood with one hand braced against the frame. His face had lost all color. He kept looking down the corridor, waiting for someone to come running with an answer. Any answer. His daughter sat behind him in her wedding dress while hundreds of people waited downstairs. The man who had promised to love her had vanished. Charles pressed a hand to his chest as a dull pain tightened beneath his ribs. Rebecca noticed at once and went to him. "Charles," she said softly. "Look at me. I'm fine." The lie came out thin. No one in that hotel was fine. Outside the suite, gossip moved faster than sympathy. Did he change his mind? Did he run? Is someone going to cancel it? Poor girl. Olivia heard enough to understand the rest. She lowered her head and closed her eyes. She prayed for footsteps. For the doors to open. For Nathaniel to rush in, pale and shaken and sorry, with some terrible but forgivable reason for all of this. A dead phone. A car crash he had escaped from. A misunderstanding. Anything that would turn the nightmare back into a wedding. No one came. The silence answered for him. 5 hours after the ceremony was supposed to begin, the venue felt less like a hotel and more like a mausoleum. Most of the guests had stopped pretending the delay was temporary. Some had left. Others remained because scandal had a pull of its own. Beyond the glass doors, reporters had begun to gather, tipped off by someone with loose lips and no shame. Cameras waited outside, hungry for the collapse of the Sinclair wedding. In a private executive lounge away from the main hall, both families stood trapped in the same terrible quiet. Olivia sat near the window. She had not changed out of the gown. No one had asked her to. Maybe they were afraid she would shatter if they said the obvious aloud. Charles finally did. He looked at his daughter first, and grief passed over his face. Then he turned to William Sinclair. "I think we have to cancel the wedding." No one spoke. Charles swallowed and straightened, though exhaustion bent something in him that had always seemed unbreakable. "My daughter has suffered enough today." Rebecca closed her eyes. Tears slipped down her cheeks. William's jaw tightened. His family name, polished and guarded for decades, was being dragged apart in a single afternoon. The Sinclair reputation had been built on control, power, and certainty. Now the world was outside waiting to watch them bleed. Charles did not care about the Sinclair name. "There is no argument to make, William," he said. "We are taking Olivia home." He turned toward her, and his voice softened. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's go." Olivia rose slowly. Her legs felt hollow. She took one unsteady breath, then another. The bouquet slipped from her hands and fell to the marble floor with a soft, final sound. She stepped toward her father. No. The word cut through the room. Every head turned. Eleanor Sinclair stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the carved head of her wooden cane. She was old, but no one had ever mistaken age for weakness in Eleanor. Her silver hair was pinned neatly back. Lines marked her face, but her spine remained straight and unforgiving. She entered the room with the slow certainty of a woman who expected people to move when she came near. They did. She stopped in the center of the lounge and looked around at them. "This wedding," she said, "will take place." Rebecca stared at her. "Eleanor, what are you talking about? Nathaniel is not here." Eleanor did not look away from the Sinclairs. "There is another groom." The room went still. William's face changed first. Shock broke through his control. "Mother," he said, very carefully, "what are you saying?" Caroline shook her head and took a step back. "No." Eleanor's expression did not soften. The Sinclair family gave its word today. A commitment was made before both families and every guest downstairs. "We will honor it." Charles's face flushed. "You cannot possibly mean." "I do," Eleanor said. Her cane tapped once against the marble. "Call Adrian." Silence fell so hard it seemed to stop the air. Olivia could not move. "Adrian." The name rang in her head, cold and impossible. Nathaniel's younger brother. The quiet one. The distant one. The man who seemed to appear at family dinners only because blood required it and leave before anyone could ask too much of him. In 2 years with Nathaniel, Olivia could count on one hand the number of real conversations she had had with Adrian Sinclair. He had never been rude. That almost made it worse. He looked at her with a cool, unreadable distance, as though she were a room he had no intention of entering. No warmth. No curiosity. No brotherly affection for the woman meant to join his family. And Eleanor wanted him to marry her. William stepped toward his mother. "That is madness." Caroline's voice broke. "You cannot replace one son with another. This is a marriage, not a seat at dinner." Rebecca put a hand over her mouth, horrified. Charles moved closer to Olivia, as if shielding her from the suggestion itself. "My daughter is not some solution to your family's embarrassment." Eleanor remained unmoved. "The embarrassment has already happened," she said. "Now we decide whether this day ends in ruin or in a wedding." The argument erupted all at once. William spoke over Caroline. Rebecca snapped at Eleanor. Charles's voice rose with a father's rage. Harper stood frozen near the wall, eyes wide, while Chloe looked from Olivia to the door as if she might drag her out herself. Olivia heard almost none of it. A ringing filled her ears. Her gaze dropped to the bouquet lying on the floor. White roses. Perfectly chosen. Perfectly arranged. Bruised now where they had hit the marble. This morning, she had been certain of her life. By evening, a room full of people was discussing whether she should marry a man who had never once looked happy to see her. At the center of it all, Eleanor Sinclair stood calm and severe, already past grief, past outrage, past decency. She had decided how the story would continue. It did not seem to matter who had to be broken to make it happen. The garden behind the pavilion was choked with shadows, the low hum of the distant crowd muffled by the thick hedge maze surrounding the grounds. Adrian Sinclair sat alone on a weathered wooden bench, a thin curl of gray smoke drifting up into the cool evening air. He brought the cigarette to his lips, taking a slow, measured drag before exhaling a plume toward the stars. He hated gatherings like this. He hated the performative smiles, the endless small talk, the suffocating scent of overpriced white roses. And more than anything, he hated this specific wedding. Not because he was against the concept of marriage, but because tonight, his golden boy older brother was marrying the only woman Adrian had spent the better part of 2 years actively avoiding. Every family dinner, every holiday, every brief encounter he had trained himself to look past her, to keep his distance, to treat her with a cool, unbothered indifference. He took another long drag, watching the ember glow in the dark. Heavy, frantic footsteps crushed the gravel path nearby. "Adrian!" Lucas Mercer stumbled around the corner, clutching his side and panting as if he'd just sprinted a marathon. Adrian didn't even bother turning his head. "You know," he said, his voice smooth and lazy, "I came all the way out here specifically to avoid the nonsense inside." Whatever crisis is happening in there, spare me. Lucas bent at the waist, resting his hands on his knees while he fought for breath. You have absolutely zero idea what's going on in there. Adrian casually flicked the ash from the tip of his cigarette into the grass. Now what? He sighed, resting his head back against the bench. I barely talked myself into showing up for this circus in the first place. A faint, cynical smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. And don't tell me my perfect big brother suddenly realized he has a younger sibling and sent you to fetch me. Lucas finally straightened up. He didn't laugh. He didn't offer a witty comeback. He just stood there, looking at Adrian with an expression that was far too grim for a wedding night. Nathaniel's gone, Lucas said flatly. Adrian's brow furrowed slightly. What? He vanished. The silence between them stretched, thick and heavy. Adrian stared at his friend, waiting for the punchline, waiting for Lucas to crack a smile and tell him Nathaniel had just been held up by a late-running client or a flat tire on the highway. Lucas's face remained stone cold. The ceremony was supposed to kick off 5 hours ago, Lucas said, his voice dropping an octave. They've turned the venue upside down. The Sinclairs have called him 100 times. His car isn't in the lot. No one knows where the hell he is. Adrian slowly pushed himself off the bench, his lazy demeanor vanishing instantly. What do you mean, disappeared? I mean exactly what I said. Lucas rubbed the back of his neck, sounding just as bewildered as he was tense. He never showed up. Adrian let out a sharp, disbelieving bark of laughter. Very funny. Did William hire you to come pull my leg? I'm serious, Adrian. The humor died in Adrian's throat. His pulse gave a single, hard thud against his ribs. Nathaniel? Abandoning his own wedding? It was absurd. Nathaniel was the prodigal son. The responsible, untouchable, meticulously disciplined lawyer who never made a misstep in his life. He was the pride of the Sinclair name. He wasn't a coward who ran out on his bride. He wouldn't do that, Adrian said quietly, his voice dangerously low. Not to her. That's why everyone inside is losing their damn minds, Lucas countered, gesturing vaguely toward the towering, brightly lit windows of the main hall. The guests are turning into a mob of gossiping vultures. The media has practically breached the front gates. And Olivia, Lucas hesitated, softening his tone. Olivia's been sitting in that room, fully dressed in her gown, for 5 hours. Adrian's jaw set into a hard, rigid line. Olivia. He hadn't permitted himself to look directly at her all day. Not when she walked in, not through the prep, not once. He didn't know if it was out of some twisted sense of loyalty to his brother, or the simple, terrifying fear of looking into her eyes and seeing a happiness he knew he'd never be the one to give her. He dropped the half-smoked cigarette to the gravel and crushed it beneath the heel of his shoe. So, Adrian slid his hands into his tailored trouser pockets, his dark eyes locking onto Lucas's. What does any of this mess have to do with me? Lucas swallowed hard, opening his mouth, then closing it again. For the first time since he had run down the garden path, the words seemed to catch in his throat. Because he knew that the moment he spoke the matriarch's command aloud, the quiet, isolated life Adrian Sinclair had built for himself would shatter into a million pieces. Set up. The double door smashed open, the loud crack against the wood sending a jolt through the quiet room. Grandmother. Adrian's voice thundered off the high ceiling, heavy with dark, furious disbelief. He strode into the lounge, his long coat sweeping around his legs, his face a hard mask of cold anger. What the hell am I hearing? His sharp gaze pinned the old woman sitting near the window. Have you completely lost your mind? Eleanor Sinclair didn't flinch. She sat with effortless composure, her posture regal despite the storm that had just breached the doorway. No, she said, her voice smooth and unhurried. I have simply made a decision. Adrian let out a harsh, bitter laugh, running a hand through his dark hair. A decision? You've decided I should step in and marry my brother's fiancé? William Sinclair pinched the bridge of his nose, letting out a weary sigh. Adrian, listen. No, Dad, Adrian snapped, cutting his father off without a second glance. His eyes never left Eleanor. I want an explanation. From her. Eleanor slowly pushed herself up from her armchair, her knuckles white against the carved handle of her wooden cane. Why shouldn't you marry her? Adrian stared at her as if she were speaking a foreign language. What? She took a deliberate step toward him, the faint thud of her cane echoing in the quiet. Tell me. Give me one valid reason why you cannot marry Olivia. Silence descended on the room, heavy and suffocating. Adrian turned his head away, his jaw working as he stared blankly at the wall. Eleanor's voice grew sharper, cutting through the stillness like a blade. What is it, Adrian? Are you not man enough to fix this? Or, her eyes narrowed, searching every line of his rigid face. Is there someone else you love? The question hit him like a physical blow, catching him completely off guard. No, he said, the word pulled from him before he could stop it. Then what is stopping you? Adrian clenched his fist so tightly his nails bit into his palm. It isn't about me. His voice dropped to a low, raw murmur. Olivia loves Nathaniel. Not me. She never has. The admission seemed to drain the air from the room. She spent 2 years building a life with him, Adrian continued, his tone thick with unspoken pain. She was supposed to become his wife tonight. I can't just step into my brother's shoes. I want to do it. Eleanor's expression didn't soften by a fraction. She has already agreed. Adrian's head snapped back to her. What? She said yes. For the first time in his life, the composed, sharp-witted architect looked entirely speechless. The color drained from his face as he stared at his grandmother. No, he muttered, shaking his head in immediate denial. No. She wouldn't. I spoke to the girl myself, Eleanor replied, her tone unreadable. She understands the stakes. She knows exactly what this marriage requires, and she still agreed. Adrian scoffed, a dark, disbelieving sound escaping his throat. You're telling me that the woman who has spent 2 years worshipping Nathaniel agreed to marry me within 5 minutes of him vanishing? It doesn't make a damn bit of sense. It doesn't have to, Eleanor said softly. Life rarely grants us the luxury of understanding every turn it takes. Adrian's chest rose and fell in uneven, ragged breaths. His mind reeled, fiercely rejecting every word she offered. Olivia had agreed? Why? It wasn't love, he knew that better than anyone. And Olivia was far too proud to accept pity. Which meant there was only one terrifying answer left, she wasn't marrying him to save herself. She was sacrificing herself to save her family from ruin, to cover the disgrace left behind by the golden child. And somehow, knowing that cut deeper than any rejection ever could. Eleanor met his furious, agonized gaze without flinching. I will not force you into this, Adrian, she said quietly, letting the heavy silence linger between them for a long moment. But before you give me your final refusal, she paused, her dark eyes flashing with something unreadable. Go talk to Olivia. Adrian's brow furrowed into a deep scowl. What difference will that make? Go and find out. Eleanor gestured vaguely toward the corridor with her head. She's waiting in the bridal suite. Adrian stood frozen for a long, agonizing second, his pulse hammering in his ears. Then, letting out a sharp, ragged exhale, he turned on his heel. Fine. He shoved through the double doors and marched down the dimly lit hallway, every step feeling like a march toward a firing squad. Chloe stepped quietly into the hallway, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind her and leaving the two of them trapped in a suffocating, isolated silence. Neither of them spoke. Olivia remained seated at the vanity mirror, her gaze fixed blankly on her own reflection. Dark, faint smudges of mascara lingered beneath her lower lashes, the only cracks in her otherwise pristine porcelain appearance. The gown, a masterpiece of ivory satin and hand-stitched tulle she had spent agonizing months designing, now felt like a leaden weight crushing her chest. Adrian stood near the threshold, his dark eyes taking in the stillness of the room before he finally broke the quiet. My grandmother thinks we should get married. A tiny, bitter laugh escaped Olivia's lips, dry and devoid of warmth. I know. I'm not here to convince you, he said softly, slipping his hands into his trouser pockets. His shoulders were tense, his posture rigid. If you say no, I'll turn around and walk right back out that door. I won't let anyone force you into this, Olivia. Not even her. Olivia slowly pushed herself up from the chair. She turned around to face him, the heavy train of her dress whispering against the floorboards. For the first time all evening, Adrian truly looked at her and the sight tore through his chest. She didn't look angry. She wasn't hysterical or panicking. She just looked completely, utterly shattered. Do you know what hurts the most? She asked quietly, her voice so thin it threatened to dissolve into the air between them. Adrian stayed silent, letting the space belong to her. I couldn't stop staring at that door, she murmured, a sad ghost of a smile touching her pale lips. Every single minute that ticked by, I kept telling myself. Nate will walk through that door now. He's just stuck in traffic. He's just running late. There has to be a reasonable explanation. The faint smile vanished, leaving behind a stark, hollow pale. But 5 hours passed, she whispered. And he never came. The silence in the bridal suite thickened, heavy with the weight of her grief. Olivia looked down at her left hand, where the large, brilliant-cut engagement ring caught the warm glow of the vanity lights. I loved him, she said, the words barely audible. God help me, I still do. Adrian felt a sharp, tight knot bind itself inside his chest, but he forced his face to remain a neutral mask. But if he truly made the conscious choice to abandon me at the altar, Olivia's fingers hovered over the band. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled the ring from her finger. Then I never want to stand in front of him again. There was no rage in her tone. No spite, no grand spectacle, only the quiet, devastating finality of a heartbreaking in real time. She set the sparkling diamond on the marble vanity with a soft clink. This marriage, she raised her head, her dark, swollen eyes meeting Adrian's for the first time. One to be real. It will be a business contract, nothing more. We save both our families from public humiliation tonight. We give the crowd outside the illusion of the ending they came here to see. She swallowed hard, her throat working against the lump caught in it. And when enough time has passed, when the dust settles, we quietly part ways. Adrian studied every line of her face, searching for any tremor of doubt. You've thought this through. I had 5 hours, Olivia replied softly. A single, silent tear finally escaped her eye, tracing a glistening path down her cheek. I had 5 long hours to realize that the life I spent 2 years planning doesn't exist anymore. She drew in a deep, shaky breath and squared her shoulders, forcing her spine into a rigid line of composure. I can't marry the man I love, she said, her voice stabilizing into something resolute. But I can at least protect the people who have spent their entire lives protecting me. She took a small step forward and extended her trembling hand. So, Mr. Sinclair, she whispered. Would you be willing to enter a 1-year contract marriage with me? Adrian looked down at her small, outstretched hand. There were no smiles. There was no warmth, no spark of hope, no romantic promise hanging in the sweet scent of the white roses around them. This wasn't the opening line of a grand love story. It was a cold, quiet pact born entirely out of survival and heartbreak. After a long, breathless moment, Adrian stepped forward and wrapped his firm, warm fingers around hers. 1 year, he agreed quietly, his voice a low rumble. 1 year, Olivia repeated. Neither of them knew it then, as the noise of the waiting world pounded on the doors outside, but fate had already decided that 12 months would never, ever be enough. The grand oak doors of the sanctuary slowly swung inward, the deep, resonant groan of the wood echoing into the high ceilings. Every whispered conversation in the cathedral vanished in an instant. Hundreds of heads turned toward the entrance, a collective breath held in the heavy air. Olivia Bennet stood in the archway in her delicate ivory gown, her arm tightly linked with her father's trembling hand. She was breathtaking, a vision of lace, light, and quiet grace. But anyone who dared to look past the immaculate silk veil and the perfect blush would see the stark, devastating truth. Her eyes were faintly swollen, rimmed with a subtle red that no amount of foundation could fully mask. She was exhausted down to her bones, having wept until her throat was raw before ever stepping foot onto this aisle. This was not how she had spent years imagining this moment. She was supposed to be floating toward Nathaniel, her heart pounding with joy as he looked at her with those familiar, loving eyes. Instead, a stranger stood waiting at the altar. Adrian Sinclair. Every step she took down the long velvet runner felt like a slow, deliberate twist of a blade in her chest. She forced her eyes to stay fixed forward, mentally screaming at herself not to search the crowd, not to scan the stained glass shadows for Nathaniel. Because she already knew the truth. He wasn't coming. Charles felt his daughter's arm shaking against his suit jacket. He squeezed her hand with tender, desperate warmth. It's going to be okay, sweetie, he whispered, his voice cracking slightly. Olivia forced her lips into a tiny, fragile smile. I know, she murmured, a quiet lie to comfort them both. At the end of the aisle, Adrian stood rooted to the polished marble floor. His tailored black tuxedo hugged his broad shoulders impeccably, yet he felt entirely trapped inside it. Everything was spinning out of control. Just a few hours ago, he had been a distant spectator in the shadows, waiting to watch his golden boy brother get married. Now, the spotlight was blinding him. He was the groom. His dark eyes never left Olivia as she neared the steps. She was beautiful, so painfully beautiful it made his chest ache. But the faint, radiant spark he had caught glimpses of over the past 2 years when she looked at Nathaniel was completely gone, replaced by a hollow, quiet grief. She reached the top step and took her place beside him. Neither of them looked at each other. Neither spoke. The priest offered a gentle, sympathetic smile before stepping forward, opening the heavy leather-bound book in his hands. "We are gathered here today in the presence of God and these witnesses to join together Adrian Sinclair and Olivia Bennett in sacred matrimony." A heavy, suffocating silence blanketed the pews. The priest turned his gaze toward Adrian. "Do you, Adrian Sinclair, take Olivia Bennett to be your lawful wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward?" For an agonizing beat, Adrian couldn't breathe. His throat felt clamped shut by a tight, invisible fist. He cast a brief sideways glance at Olivia. She wasn't looking back, she was staring straight at the altar, her jaw set, her chin tilted up as she fought with every fiber of her being to keep from breaking down in front of 300 people. Adrian closed his eyes, took one steadying breath, and spoke into the quiet. "I do." The priest nodded slowly, turning his attention to the bride. "And do you, Olivia Bennett, take Adrian Sinclair to be your lawful wedded husband?" Olivia drew in a deep, trembling breath. She squared her shoulders, lifted her chin high, and looked directly ahead. "I do." Her voice didn't waver. It was clear, firm, and surprisingly strong, a quiet armor erected over a shattered heart. No one watching would have guessed that just hours earlier, she had been curled on a sofa in the bridal suite, sobbing until she couldn't breathe. Relieved, quiet exhales rippled through the front pews. "By the power vested in me," the priest announced, his voice carrying warmth through the vast space, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." He paused, offering them a quiet, weighted look. "You may kiss the bride." Dead silence fell over the church once again. The air grew so still that the faint flicker of the candle flames near the altar seemed loud. In the front rows, neither family moved. No one smiled. William lowered his head, staring at his shoes, while Caroline pressed a lace handkerchief to her eyes to catch fresh tears. Beside them, Rebecca clutched Charles's hand so tightly her knuckles were white. Olivia slowly turned her body toward Adrian. Their eyes locked for the very first time that day. There was no joy between them, no spark of electric romance, only two tired survivors standing on the wreckage of a shattered dream, bound together by a solemn contract. Adrian saw the quiet panic flickering in her eyes as the silence stretched a second too long. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a feather-light whisper meant only for her ears. "I'll make it quick." A microscopic nod was her only reply. "Thank you," she breathed out. Adrian reached up, his long fingers gently cupping the side of her soft cheek. His touch was warm, surprisingly careful, as if he were holding something fragile that might snap if he applied the slightest pressure. He dipped his head down, closing the small distance between them, and pressed his lips softly against hers. It was brief, simple, and entirely restrained, a silent promise sealed in the softest pressure of their breathing. There was no performance for the crowd, no pretense of wild passion. Just two warm lips meeting hers in a gesture of profound, gentle protection. When he pulled back, his hand lingered on her cheek for a fraction of a second before dropping away. Olivia's eyes slowly opened, her breath catching softly in her throat. The church remained completely spellbound around them. It wasn't the kiss of two people in love, but somehow, in the quiet gravity of the moment, it carried far more reverence than passion ever could. The silence in the car had been total, heavy, and exhausting, stretching across 40 minutes of highway until the sleek lines of the modern home appeared against the dusk. Now, standing in the middle of the spotless, dimly lit foyer, the echo of his retreat into the kitchen hung in the cool air. Olivia stood frozen, holding up the heavy, useless train of a dress that had belonged to a completely different life. The smooth, dark wood floors beneath her heels felt impossibly cold. In the kitchen, Adrian leaned against the polished marble island, the condensation from his glass of water cold against his knuckles. He kept his eyes fixed straight ahead on the dark glass of the patio doors, staring at his own reflection rather than turning around to face the woman standing 20 feet away. He could hear the quiet, heavy rustle of her silk gown every time she shifted her weight. He could hear the faint, uneven rhythm of her breathing. Every instinct in him screamed to turn around, to take the heavy layers of tulle from her hands, to guide her upstairs and tell her that despite the nightmare of the last 10 hours, she was safe here. But he clamped his jaw shut, taking another slow swallow of water until his throat burned. Don't, he warned himself. Don't you dare. If he gave her comfort now, it would be a lie. It would be a cruel, deceptive kindness that neither of them could afford. She hadn't married Adrian Sinclair because she wanted his hand on her waist or his comfort in the dark. She had married the Sinclair name to salvage her family's honor from the wreckage Nathaniel had left behind. To her, Adrian was just the emergency proxy. The stand-in. And to him, she was the ultimate temptation he had spent 2 long years forcing himself to ignore. Behind him, the faint swish of silk stopped. The second door on the left? Olivia's voice cut through the quiet, remarkably steady despite the faint tremor beneath it. Adrian didn't turn around. Yeah, he said, his tone flat, clipped, and deliberately uninviting. Towels are in the linen closet inside the bathroom. Thank you, she whispered. He listened to the slow, heavy sound of her steps as she navigated the floating staircase, the delicate fabric of her dress sweeping against the wooden steps. A minute later, a door clicked softly shut overhead. The moment the lock engaged, Adrian set his glass down on the marble counter with a sharp, echoing clack. He let out a ragged breath he hadn't realized he was holding, dragging both hands through his dark hair as he dropped his head. The absolute silence of his home, a space he had carefully built to be a solitary sanctuary, now felt suffocating. Upstairs, Olivia stood in the center of the guest room. It was beautifully furnished, immaculate, and entirely soulless. A pristine king-sized bed, crisp gray linens, and a floor-to-ceiling window looking out over the quiet hills. She walked over to the tall mirror resting against the wall and looked at herself. The bridal veil was slightly crooked. The silk was wrinkled from hours in the car. She reached behind her back, her fingers straining to catch the delicate pearl buttons running down the spine of her dress, but her hands were shaking too violently to unfasten them. After 3 failed attempts, her arms dropped to her sides. A single, hot tear finally escaped, cutting a clean trail through the dust and makeup on her cheek, followed by another, until she was standing in the quiet of a stranger's house, silently weeping into the reflection of a wedding dress she never should have worn. Morning arrived quietly, filtering pale, gray sunlight through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the guest room. For a few fleeting seconds, floating in the haze between sleep and waking, Olivia forgot. She stared up at the unfamiliar high ceiling, her mind drifting lazily as she waited for the familiar comfort of her own bedroom to settle over her. Then the heavy, suffocating weight landed squarely on her chest. She wasn't at home. She wasn't Nathaniel's bride to be adjusting last-minute floral arrangements. She was Adrian Sinclair's wife. A sharp, physical ache bloomed behind her ribs. Olivia rolled onto her side and slowly reached for her phone resting on the sleek wooden nightstand. The screen burst to life, a relentless flood of notifications lighting up the dark glass. 327 unread messages. Friends, extended family, distant acquaintances, former clients, vendors, a sea of glowing text bubbles floating on her screen. Congratulations, Mrs. Sinclair. Wishing you both a lifetime of absolute happiness. You looked like an absolute dream yesterday. May God bless your marriage, Olivia. A hollow, bitter smile touched her lips. If only they knew the farce they were celebrating. Her thumb flicked idly across the glass, scrolling past the endless sea of red notification dots without opening a single conversation. And then, her thumb froze. A single contact name stared back at her from near the top of the log. Nathaniel. Her heart gave a violent, painful thud against her ribs. For a long, breathless moment, she couldn't move. She just stared at the 8 letters that had defined her entire world for 2 years. With a trembling finger, she tapped the thread. There was only one message, sent in the dead of night. I'm sorry, Liv. But I can't do this. That was all. No explanation. No frantically typed reason. No tearful plea for forgiveness. Just 7 words to burn down 2 years of trust, devotion, and shared dreams. Olivia read the text once. Then twice. She stared at the screen, holding her breath, waiting for the little animated dots that signaled he was typing something else, an explanation, a confession, anything. The screen remained still. A single, hot tear escaped her lash line and tracked down her temple into her hair. She reached up and brushed it away with the back of her hand, her expression hardening into something cold and resolute. "No," she whispered to the empty room, her voice surprisingly steady. "If you could leave me standing at that altar, you don't get to leave 7 words and walk away." Without another second of hesitation, she tapped his profile header. Her thumb didn't tremble as she selected block contact. A confirmation window popped up on the screen. "Block Nathaniel?" Olivia pressed the red text. "Blocked." She placed the phone face down on the mattress and pushed herself out of bed. 20 minutes later, the high-fashion bride of yesterday was gone. Olivia stepped down the floating staircase wearing an oversized cream sweater, worn blue jeans, and her chestnut hair tied back into a loose, practical ponytail. The rich, dark aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the open-concept lower level. Olivia followed the scent toward the dining area, her sneakers making almost no sound on the hardwood. Adrian was already there. Dressed in a dark charcoal button-down with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, he sat alone at the massive timber table. A plate of untouched breakfast sat beside a sprawling stack of architectural blueprints, which he was examining with intense, unwavering focus. He didn't look up when her footsteps crossed the threshold. "Morning," Olivia said softly, stopping a few feet from the table. Silence. Only the crisp, sharp rustle of a blueprint page turning. Olivia hesitated, her hands tucked awkwardly into the front pocket of her sweater. "Can I?" "You don't need my permission to sit in your own residence," Adrian replied, his tone smooth, even, and entirely devoid of warmth. His eyes never left the complex lines of the building schematic. Olivia quietly pulled out a heavy leather chair across from him and sat down. The distance between them across the wide table felt vast, cold, and heavy. A middle-aged housekeeper emerged from the kitchen carrying a small tray, offering Olivia a warm, sympathetic smile. "Good morning, ma'am." "Good morning," Olivia replied softly, forcing a polite smile onto her face. The woman set a plate of eggs and fresh fruit in front of her, along with a steaming cup of black coffee, before quietly slipping back into the kitchen. Olivia picked up her fork, but her stomach was tied in tight knots. She couldn't bring herself to eat a single bite. After a few minutes of agonizing silence, broken only by the clatter of Adrian's coffee cup against its saucer, he finally spoke. He kept his gaze locked onto the paper in front of him. There's a document on the kitchen counter. Olivia blinked, looking up from her plate. "What?" "If we're going to do this," Adrian said, his voice flat and clinical, "we're going to do it properly." He folded the corner of a blueprint with precise, practiced care. "Read it over," he continued. "If there are terms you disagree with, mark them. If you don't like the foundation of it," he finally raised his head, his dark, piercing eyes locking onto hers for the first time that morning. "Don't sign it." He held her gaze for a split second before dropping his eyes right back to his work, slicing through his breakfast as if discussing a legally binding contract. Marriage was no different than reviewing a site permit. Adrian folded the blueprint with methodical care, the heavy paper snapping neatly into alignment. Without a word, he moved around the long dining table. He picked up his car keys from the kitchen island with one hand, then gathered his leather laptop bag, his tailored suit jacket, and his phone. Every movement was carried out with sharp, mechanical precision, a man running through a morning checklist he could complete in his sleep. Olivia watched him silently from her chair, her hands wrapped around her warm coffee mug. "You're leaving?" Adrian fastened the strap of his watch around his wrist, his gaze never drifting to her. "I have work." He slung the bag over his shoulder. "You can find everything you need in the house. The pantry is stocked. If anything breaks," he gestured vaguely toward the back hallway. "Tell Nora." He didn't wait for her to answer. Within seconds, the heavy front door clicked open, swept outward, and shut firmly behind him. The faint rumble of a sports car engine purred to life in the driveway, echoed down the street, and slowly faded into the quiet of the morning. Olivia stood alone near the dining table, staring at the blank paneling of the entrance. She wasn't even sure what she had been waiting for. A goodbye? A hesitant take care? A simple glance? Anything to acknowledge that two human beings were sharing a life-altering secret under the same roof. Instead, he had walked out as if she were nothing more than a new piece of minimalism he'd recently added to the living room. A light rustle broke the quiet as the housekeeper re-emerged from the pantry, carrying a crystal bowl filled with fresh berries. She glanced toward the front hallway before looking back at Adrian's plate, her eyebrows lifting in mild surprise. "I've worked here a long time, and I don't think I've ever seen Mr. Sinclair leave a breakfast unfinished," she noted, setting the fruit down near Olivia. Olivia offered a polite, quiet nod. He seemed eager to get to the office. The older woman paused, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked at Olivia with a polite, curious warmth, hesitating for a fraction of a second before speaking up. "May I ask you something?" "Of course," Olivia replied, relaxing her shoulders slightly. The housekeeper offered a sheepish, embarrassed smile. "Are you Mr. Sinclair's girlfriend?" A short, breathless laugh escaped Olivia's lips before she could catch it. "No," she said softly. "I'm his wife." The crystal bowl in the woman's hands wobbled precariously as her grip slipped. "His wife?" Olivia gave a small, confirmed nod. The woman blinked once, twice, processing the information, before her face split into a wide, luminous smile. "Well, bless my heart, that's wonderful news." She let out a merry chuckle, shaking her head in disbelief. "I've taken care of this property for 6 years now, and in all that time I've never seen a single woman cross this threshold. Not one." She looked at Olivia as if she were looking at a small miracle. "Mr. Sinclair keeps entirely to himself. He leaves before the sun is up, comes home long after dark, and lives like a monk in a museum." And now, her smile widened. "He comes home with a wife." Olivia lowered her eyes to her cup, a faint, bittersweet smile touching her lips. If only it were quite that simple. "I'm sorry?" "Nothing," Olivia said quickly, shaking her head. "Just a complicated week." The older woman stepped forward, her expression softening into something motherly as she extended a warm, calloused hand. "Well, complicated or not, welcome. My name is Nora." Olivia took her hand, squeezing it warmly. "It's so very nice to meet you, Nora. And please," she offered a gentle, earnest look. "You don't have to call me ma'am or anything formal. Just call me Olivia." Nora's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Well, if we're dropping formalities, then you'll have to stop calling me Nora." Olivia tilted her head, amused. "Oh? My grandchildren call me Granny Nora," the old woman said, winking gently. "And around here, anyone who deals with Adrian Sinclair's moodiness qualifies as family in my book." A soft, genuine laugh finally bubbled up from Olivia's chest, the first real sound of light to leave her lips since yesterday morning. Then, "Granny Nora it is," Olivia murmured. The heavy, hollow ache in her chest didn't vanish, nor did the quiet sting of the ring missing from her finger. But as the morning light filled the spotless kitchen, she felt a tiny thread of warmth anchor her to the house, a subtle reminder that even in the coldest spaces, comfort has a way of finding room to grow. Olivia wandered through the quiet house, her steps echoing faintly against the polished hardwood before Adrian's words resurfaced in her mind. "There's a contract on the counter." She walked into the living room, where a sleek black leather folder rested neatly in the exact center of the marble coffee table. Beside it lay a heavy silver pen, aligned with mathematical precision. Olivia took a slow, steadying breath, sat on the edge of the sofa, and opened the folder. The crisp white page inside bore a bold, formal header. Contract marriage agreement. Between Mr. Adrian Sinclair and Ms. Olivia Bennett. Her eyes drifted down to the first numbered section. Clause 1. This marriage exists solely to protect the reputation of both the Sinclair and Bennett families. It does not constitute a romantic relationship. Olivia's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the leather cover. She flipped the page. Clause 2. The agreement shall remain valid for 1 year from the date of marriage. At the end of 12 months, both parties may file for a mutual divorce without objection. 1 year. 365 days. That was the price of salvaging her family's honor and burying the scandal. She swallowed the lump in her throat and kept reading. Clause 3. Both parties will continue living in the same residence to avoid public suspicion. Clause 4. Separate bedrooms shall be maintained at all times. Neither party may enter the other's bedroom without prior permission. A tiny, humorless smile tugged at the corner of Olivia's lips. As if either of us would, she murmured to the empty room. Clause 5. Neither party shall interfere in the other's personal or professional life unless assistance is explicitly requested. Clause 6. Public appearances as husband and wife are mandatory whenever required by family or social obligations. Clause 7. Neither party shall disclose the true nature of this agreement to anyone. Clause 8. Respect is expected at all times. Personal insults, unnecessary arguments, and public humiliation are strictly prohibited. Olivia paused, her eyes lingering over the 8th rule. That one surprised her. For a man who hid behind an armor of icy indifference, Adrian had gone out of his way to draft a protection clause. He wasn't promising warmth, but he was promising decency. She drew a breath and read the next line. Clause 9. No emotional or physical expectations shall exist between either party. Olivia stared at the words until they blurred slightly on the paper. A quiet, sharp ache bloomed in her chest, not because she wanted intimacy from Adrian Sinclair, but because seeing her life reduced to black and white legalese made the surreal nightmare of the last 24 hours painfully, irreversibly real. She flipped to the final page. At the bottom of the document, 2 clean signature lines waited side by side. The left line was already filled. Adrian's handwriting was angular, sharp, and strikingly confident, the dark ink dry against the paper. Olivia uncapped the silver pen. For a single second, her hand hovered above the paper. She knew that the moment metal touched would pulp, every remnant of the life she had envisioned with Nathaniel would be permanently erased. A memory unspooled in her mind, unbidden and painful. I can't wait to make you my wife, Liv, Nathaniel had whispered into her hair just weeks ago. Olivia's grip on the silver casing tightened until her knuckles turned white. You should be thought about that before you ran, she whispered cold, sharp words to the ghost in her head. Without another second of hesitation, she pressed the nib to the page and signed her name in fluid, sweeping cursive. Olivia Bennett Sinclair. The ink was still wet when her mind caught up to what her fingers had written. Sinclair. Not Bennett. She stared at the legal surname for a long, heavy moment. It looked foreign. It felt wrong on her tongue. Yet as of yesterday, it was legally, irrevocably hers. Olivia quietly closed the black leather folder, leaving the silver pen aligned neatly beside it on the marble table. It's just 365 days, she murmured, standing up to look out at the quiet garden through the floor-to-ceiling glass. 1 year. After that, we both get our freedom back. She stood there in the silence, entirely unaware that fate had never intended to let either of them walk away when the year was up. The sun had long burned down into the horizon, leaving the dining room wrapped in deep shadows and the cool amber glow of recessed lighting. The silence between them was an open flame, quiet, sharp, and hot enough to singe. The only sound in the vast space was the rhythmic, metallic scrape of silver cutlery against fine porcelain, punctuated by the steady tick of the antique clock mounting to far wall. Olivia sat across from Adrian, the dark timber of the long table stretching like a desert between them. Neither had uttered a single word since the heavy front door had clicked shut behind him an hour ago. Nora placed a steaming bowl of truffle-infused tagliatelle on the table, her perceptive eyes flicking between Adrian's stony jaw and Olivia's exhausted posture. Sensing the thick, charged friction humming in the air, the housekeeper offered a quiet nod and slipped discreetly toward the rear quarters. Olivia picked up her fork, poking absent-mindedly at her food. She wasn't eating. She was simply tracing small, frustrated circles into the sauce, her mind racing. Opposite her, Adrian ate with slow, deliberate precision. The top 2 buttons of his charcoal dress shirt were undone, his dark sleeves rolled up to reveal leaning forearms and the heavy face of his watch. He looked dark, immaculate, and utterly unbothered, a man effortlessly in control of his environment, even if his newly acquired wife was sitting 6 feet away. Olivia swallowed the dry lump in her throat, gathering the ragged edges of her courage. I'm going back to the work tomorrow. Adrian didn't miss a beat. He lifted his dark, piercing gaze, letting it rest on her face. His eyes were sharp, taking in every detail: the faint indigo shadows beneath her lower lashes, the pale skin, the fact that she hadn't managed more than 2 bites of dinner. A pulse jumped in his jaw. He looked back down at his plate. Do whatever you think is best, he said, his voice a low, raspy baritone that held no warmth, yet hit the quiet room with weight. Olivia nodded, her fingers tightening around the silver fork. I've already burned through enough leave for the wedding. No response. Just the quiet scrape of his knife against his plate. She reached for her wine glass, taking a slow sip of the deep red Cabernet to steady her nerves before trying again. This Sunday, she hesitated, holding the crystal stem so tightly her knuckles paled. My family is hosting a dinner for us. It was the traditional post-wedding gathering, a cruel ordeal designed for families to toast the newlyweds. An ordeal she would give anything to escape. She forced her gaze to rise, locking directly onto Adrian's dark eyes. Will you come with me? Adrian set his fork down with a sharp clink. For 3 terrifying seconds, the air in the room thinned. Olivia felt her pulse hammer against her ribs, fully expecting him to deliver a flat, arrogant refusal. Instead, he kept his eyes pinned to hers, his dark gaze trailing over the curve of her throat before returning to her eyes. Fine, he murmured, the single word dripping with a dark, dangerous indifference. He pushed his chair back and stood in one fluid, imposing motion. I'm done. He didn't offer to wait. He picked up his plate, carried it to the sink, and turned on his heel toward the grand floating staircase. Olivia's heart rattled in her chest as she watched his long strided, confident retreat. When his shoe hit the first step, he stopped dead. He didn't turn around, but the tension in his broad shoulders was palpable. We play the devoted couple in public, Olivia, his voice echoed off the high ceilings, low, smooth, and laced with a subtle edge that sent a sudden shiver down her spine. Don't mistake the act for reality when the doors close. Olivia lowered her gaze, her lips parting on a soft, ragged exhale. I never did. A brief, heavy beat passed. Adrian gave a single, dismissive nod and continued up the stairs. A moment later, the deep thud of his bedroom door closing echoed through the quiet house like a drawn blade. Olivia remained sitting in the dim glow of the dining room, utterly alone. She stared down at the untouched food, the quiet space around her feeling wider and darker than before. She had thought loneliness was an empty room. But as she sat there in the shadow of Adrian Sinclair's lingering scent, sandalwood, rain, and cold leather, she realized the truth. Loneliness was sitting inches away from a man who burned with a dark, irresistible authority, only to realize he was 1,000 miles out of reach. The house was wrapped in silence. It was well past midnight. Moonlight spilled through the bedroom window, painting silver, icy shadows across the dark floorboards. Olivia sat on the edge of her bed, her knees pulled tight against her chest. She had spent the entire day wearing a mask, smiling when she had to, speaking when necessary, keeping her spine straight so no one would see her shatter. But now, in the dark, there was no audience left to fool. Her trembling fingers reached out to open the top drawer of the bedside table. Inside, resting on the velvet lining, lay the engagement ring Nathaniel had given her, the one she had pulled off her finger right before signing Adrian's cold, transactional contract. Olivia stared at the gleaming rock for what felt like an eternity. Then, with shaking hands, she lifted it out into the light. Tears blurred her vision, hot and uncontrollable. Why? Her voice cracked, a fragile, broken sound in the stillness. Why did you do this to me, Nate? The dark room gave no answer. You promised me forever, she choked out, a fresh tear tracking down her cheek. You looked me in the eyes and told me you'd never leave. So why? Why did you leave me standing there in front of everyone? Her chest heaved as her breathing grew ragged. She pressed a trembling palm over her mouth, trying desperately to swallow the sound of her own grief. It didn't work. A sharp, ragged sob broke free from her throat, followed by another, and another, until her entire body shook under the force of her heartbreak. Was I not enough for you? She whispered into the dark, her shoulders trembling. What did I do wrong? The painful questions echoed off the walls. In a sudden surge of agony, Olivia threw the ring across the room. It struck the far wall with a sharp metallic clang before ricocheting into the dark and vanishing beneath the heavy oak dresser. I hate you, she whispered, then immediately shook her head, pulling her hair back from her face. No. God, I hate that I still love you. She buried her face in her hands, the dam finally breaking. She cried until her lungs burned, weeping for the future that had been stolen from her in a single afternoon. Outside her bedroom door, Adrian stood frozen in the hallway. He hadn't intended to stop. He had only come down the dimly lit corridor for a glass of water, but the muffled sound of weeping had rooted his feet to the floorboards. His hand hovered inches from the brass doorknob. Through the thin wood, he heard every broken word. Every shuddering breath. Every agonized question she was hurling at a ghost. A sharp, suffocating tightness constricted in his chest. His fingers twitched toward the handle. Every instinct urged him to turn the knob, to step inside, to pull her into his arms and tell her she wasn't he alone, that none of this mess was her fault. But he stayed where he was. She wasn't he weeping for him. She was mourning his brother. Adrian's jaw set into a hard, rigid line, dark eyes staring blankly at the door. He refused to be the shadow standing in the corner, holding a woman while her heart bled for another man. So he stood guard in the dark hallway. Silent. Unmoving. Forced to listen as the woman he had just sworn to protect broke over the memory of his brother. Minutes bled into an hour. The frantic sobs slowly subsided into quiet, hitched breaths, until finally, the room fell entirely still. Olivia had cried herself into exhaustion. Adrian slowly closed his eyes, letting out a quiet, heavy exhale. For the first time since he had stepped up to take Nathaniel's place at the altar, a cold truth washed over him. This arrangement wasn't he just going to test Olivia. It was going to tear him apart piece by piece. Without making a sound, Adrian turned on his heel and melted back into the shadows of the hallway, returning to his own cold, silent room. He never saw the ring resting beneath the dresser, abandoned in the dark, left behind just like the promise it was supposed to keep. Morning arrived in a pale, muted hush, casting faint gray ribbons of light across the kitchen table. The atmosphere was an exact, predictable replica of the day before, quiet, cold, and heavy with unspoken thoughts. Olivia sat with her mug in both hands, stirring her coffee in slow, hypnotic circles. Opposite her, Adrian sat in a crisp white shirt, his focus absorbed by the morning paper. A steaming cup of black coffee sat virtually untouched near his hand. Neither had uttered a sound since she walked downstairs. Until Adrian broke the silence without warning. "I'm dropping you off at work." Olivia's spoon clicked sharply against the ceramic. She looked up, startled. Adrian didn't look back. He merely turned a page of the newspaper with a crisp, dry rustle, his tone as casual as if he commented on the morning traffic. "And I'll pick you up when your day is over." She blinked, momentarily thrown. "What?" "Until your car is delivered," he elaborated, his voice flat and measured. Olivia immediately shook her head. "No, please, that's really not necessary." She managed a small, polite smile that felt brittle on her lips. "I can just take the bus. Or grab a cab." Adrian lowered the newspaper, setting it down with deliberate care. His dark, sharp eyes fixed on her face, completely unreadable. "We are married," he said calmly, letting the words settle between them. He paused, his jaw tightening slightly before he added, "Even if it's only for the benefit of the public." He folded the paper into a neat square and laid it beside his plate. "And for as long as this agreement stands, your safety and convenience remain my responsibility." Olivia stared at him, caught entirely off guard. She had prepared herself for cold indifference, for cynical remarks, not this pragmatic, unyielding sense of duty. She looked down at her coffee, her fingers tracing the rim of the mug. "It's not as simple as dropping me off at an office, Adrian," she explained, her voice dropping to a softer register. "My schedule is completely unpredictable. Some days I'm at a venue on the south side, sometimes I'm spending hours in a florist's greenhouse or meeting clients across town. I don't even know where I'll end up by 5 o'clock. Adrian simply looked at her for a long, quiet second, his gaze tracing the tired line of her mouth. "That isn't a problem." He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and slid the sleek dark glass across the polished wood toward her. "Save your number." Olivia looked from the phone to his face. "And?" "Send yourself a text," he said, taking a slow sip of his black coffee. "That way I'll have yours. Whenever your location changes during the day, drop a pin and send it to me. I'll pick you up wherever you are. No grand gestures. No theatrical warmth. Just a clean, efficient solution to a practical problem." Olivia picked up the device. As the screen woke, the display caught her attention. It wasn't a photograph or a default abstract pattern. It was a stark black background bearing a single, clean line of white typography. Less emotion. Better decisions. She stared at the words for a beat, a quiet realization settling in her chest. It was a brief, rare window into the code he lived by. She opened the contacts, carefully typed her digits, and sent a one-word text to her own device. "Olivia." A second later, her purse hummed on the chair beside her. A new contact appeared on her screen, Adrian Sinclair. She slid his phone back across the table. Done. Adrian caught the device, slipped it into his trouser pocket, and stood up in one fluid motion, buttoning his jacket. We leave in 10 minutes. Don't be late. He turned and walked toward the foyer without waiting for a reply, his leather soles snapping against the floorboards. Olivia sat back, her eyes trailing his retreating frame. He wasn't gentle. He certainly wasn't easy to read, and he hid behind a fortress of absolute detachment. But beneath that icy exterior, he moved with an unshakable, relentless sense of obligation. And for the very first time since she had signed away her name, Olivia found herself wondering if the cold walls of Adrian Sinclair were built to keep people out or to keep something else hidden inside. 10 minutes later, Olivia settled into the plush leather of the passenger seat. Adrian brought the engine to life with a quiet, powerful purr, pulling out of the driveway without a word. The drive was as thick with quiet as every other moment they had shared. Olivia rested her temple against the cool glass of the window, watching the city gradually awaken in shades of morning gold. Commuters hurried along the sidewalks with coat collars turned up. Coffee shops buzzed with early morning crowds, and the traffic swelled into a steady crawl with every passing block. She had assumed Adrian was driving her straight to her agency. But after nearly 20 minutes of navigating the downtown grid, the dark sedan pulled into the quiet courtyard of an exclusive, high-end jewelry house. Olivia's brow furrowed. Adrian cut the ignition, the quiet returning instantly to the cabin. We're here. She stared through the windshield at the discreet, elegant gold lettering on the boutique's stone facade before turning to him. A jeweler? Adrian unclasped his seatbelt with a soft click. Yes. But, she looked at him, genuine confusion clouding her eyes. Why are we stopping here? For the first time that morning, Adrian turned his head and looked directly at her. His gaze lingered on her face for a brief second before dropping deliberately to her bare left hand resting in her lap. No ring. He lifted his own left hand. His ring finger was equally bare. We're married, he said, his tone entirely even, unreadable. Yet neither of us is wearing a band. Olivia's eyes dropped instinctively to her fingers. She hadn't even thought about it. The chaos of yesterday had moved with such terrifying speed that the exchange of rings had been completely lost in the wreckage. If people notice, Adrian continued, his dark eyes meeting hers again, they'll start asking questions. And questions fuel rumors. My family can't afford any more of those this week. Olivia nodded slowly, the logic cold and unassailable. I understand. Come on. He opened his door and stepped out into the crisp air. Olivia followed, stepping through the boutique's heavy glass doors as a soft chime resonated through the quiet showroom. Inside, warm golden lights shimmered off pristine glass cases, illuminating rows of meticulously arranged platinum, gold, and diamonds. An attentive saleswoman approached them with a practiced, warm smile. Good morning. Congratulations, she said smoothly, taking in the tailored lines of Adrian's suit and Olivia's soft elegance. Are we looking for wedding bands today? Before Olivia could open her mouth, Adrian spoke up, his voice clipped and efficient. Simple. No custom designs. Just something elegant. The saleswoman blinked, briefly thrown by his sharp efficiency, before her smile returned seamlessly. Of course, sir. Right this way. She guided them to a private counter and carefully laid out several velvet trays. Please, take your time. Olivia stepped up to the glass, her eyes drifting over the displays. Once, she had imagined this moment so differently. In the quiet corners of her mind, she had pictured laughing, teasing, trying on dozens of bands while the man she loved watched her with glowing eyes. Instead, she stood beside a husband who approached the purchase like a line item on an balance sheet. She reached out, her fingers brushing over a tray of rings. There were classic platinum bands, intricate engravings, and delicate pave settings. Her hand stopped over a stunning, thin platinum ring anchored by a solitary oval diamond. It was breathless. Simple, radiant, and painfully similar to the design she had drawn in her sketchbook years ago. She lifted it gently and slipped it onto her ring finger. For a fraction of a second, an effortless, genuine smile touched her lips. Then reality slammed back into her chest. This wasn't Nathaniel's ring. This wasn't the life she had planned, and this band wasn't a symbol of a dream fulfilled, it was an anchor holding together a lie. The warmth vanished from her face. Quietly, carefully, she pulled the ring from her finger and settled it back into its velvet groove. Instead, she picked up a plain, unadorned platinum band. This one is fine. The saleswoman offered a polite nod. A classic, timeless choice. It'll do, Olivia murmured softly. Standing beside her, Adrian Henty uttered a sound. But he hadn't missed a single frame. He had seen the exact moment her eyes had lit up over the oval diamond, and the cold shadow that fell over her face when she put it back. The diamond, Adrian said calmly, pointing to the tray. We'll take that one. Olivia snapped her head toward him, her cheeks flushing. No. Adrian, no, this one is completely fine. She held up the simple platinum band. Adrian shook his head, his dark eyes fixed on her. You liked the other one. It doesn't matter. It does. It's excessively expensive, she whispered sharply, glancing at the saleswoman, who strategically stepped back to give them privacy. I am well aware of the price. This marriage is temporary, Olivia argued under her breath, searching his face for any sign of reason. Adrian didn't blink. So? Olivia opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She stared at him, utterly speechless. Adrian turned his attention back to the attendant. Pack the diamond ring for her. And a matching plain platinum band for me. Right away, sir. As the woman carried the tray toward the back register, Olivia leaned closer to him, keeping her voice low. You really didn't have to do that. Adrian glanced down at her, the shadow of a dark, unreadable emotion passing through his eyes. I know I didn't. He paused, his voice dropping into a quiet, low register that sent a sudden, unexpected ripple through her chest. I wanted to. That was all he said. He didn't offer a smile, nor did his expression soften. But as they waited in silence for the boxes to be wrapped, those 4 simple words lingered in the air between them, echoing far longer than Olivia ever expected them to. The moment Olivia stepped through the glass doors of the agency, someone snagged her by the wrist and yanked her into the break room corner. Excuse me, Mrs. Sinclair. Olivia turned around to find Harper standing there, arms crossed tightly over her chest, tapping her foot on the tile. Seriously? It's been literally 1 day since your wedding, and you're already dragging yourself into work. Olivia managed a faint, tired smile. Wedding? A breath of a laugh escaped her lips, hollow and sharp. Call it a business agreement. Harper's brow furrowed, her eyes narrowing. What? Nothing. Olivia shook her head quickly, reaching for her laptop bag resting on her desk. Forget I said anything. Before Harper could grill her any further, the rest of the planning team caught sight of her, and the office erupted. Within seconds, a half-dozen colleagues had swarmed her desk. Oh my God! Madison gasped, practically lunging forward to snatch Olivia's left hand. Look at this. Your ring is gorgeous. Every eye in the room instantly locked onto the sparkling oval diamond catching the fluorescent lights of the office. It suits you so well, Olivia, another planner breathed, leaning in for a closer look. Ryan leaned back against the edge of a nearby cubicle with a broad grin. The ring is nice, sure, but from the photo circulating online, your husband is somehow even more handsome. Olivia blinked, caught off guard. You saw him? You should let us come to the ceremony. Ryan laughed. I genuinely regret missing it now. Seriously, when are you introducing us to him? Madison asked, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. We want to meet the mysterious Mr. Sinclair in the flesh. Olivia offered a practiced, polite smile that barely grazed her eyes. Well, you'll probably get your chance today. The entire department froze. Wait, what? Madison gasped. He's picking me up after work, Olivia said softly. The office instantly turned into a chorus of dramatic squeals and gasps. What? Madison pressed both hands over her heart, leaning dramatically against Ryan's shoulder. He drives across town just to pick you up himself? That is sickeningly romantic. Olivia held her smile steady, nodding along with their excitement while a quiet, bitter weight settled in her chest. If only they knew. There wasn't a single shred of romance waiting for her in that sleek black sedan. The man coming to collect her wasn't doing it out of affection, yearning, or love. He was doing it because, in the cold, unyielding world of Adrian Sinclair, taking care of her was simply another task on his checklist, a duty he intended to fulfill without failing. Across the city, inside the sleek glass walls of Arctic Tech architects, blueprints covered almost every square inch of Adrian's massive oak desk. He sat alone in his corner office, a drafting pencil resting between his fingers, his eyes narrowed as he traced the structural grid of a high-profile residential build. The room was sterile, quiet, and meticulously organized just the way he liked it. A sharp knock sounded against the open glass door frame. Without waiting for permission, Lucas strolled inside carrying 2 steam-venting paper cups of coffee. So, he set one cup directly onto the corner of Adrian's blue line prints. When's the reception party? Adrian didn't even lift his gaze from the paper. What party? The one for your wedding, obviously. Lucas leaned back against the edge of the desk, a broad grin spreading across his face. I know the whole thing went down under emergency protocols, but a wedding is still a wedding. You're a married man now, Sinclair. Adrian slowly raised his head. He didn't say a word, but the sudden, sub-zero glare he leveled at his friend was enough to make Lucas instantly raise both hands and surrender. Okay. Lucas laughed, holding his palms out. I'll back off. He pulled out the leather armchair opposite Adrian and dropped into it, his smile settling into something far more knowing. But don't sit there acting like you can fool me, man. Adrian pinched the bridge of his nose and let out a heavy, tired breath. Here we go. You've loved Olivia for 2 years, Lucas said softly, the playful banter completely vanishing from his voice. Silence slammed down on the office, heavy and suffocating. Lucas leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I still remember that afternoon, Adrian. You saw her first. At that little brick flower shop near the town square, remember? You were standing by the glass display, and you couldn't take your eyes off her. Adrian's jaw set into a hard, rigid line, the pencil in his hand gripping tighter. You were literally 2 steps away from walking over to introduce yourself, Lucas murmured, his voice cutting through Adrian's composure like a scalpel. And right before you could cross the room, Nathaniel walked through the front door. The memory flashed hot and sharp behind Adrian's eyes, as fresh as if it had occurred 5 minutes ago. Nathaniel wrapping a hand around her waist, introducing her to the family with that easy, perfect smile. Everyone, this is my girlfriend, Olivia. Adrian looked away, staring past Lucas toward the bare wall. I never loved her. Lucas scoffed quietly. You never admitted it. There's a massive difference. Adrian remained entirely motionless. You skipped every single Sunday family dinner because you knew she'd be sitting across the table, Lucas pressed on, relentless. You left every holiday gathering early. You trained yourself to never look at her for more than 2 seconds at a time. You weren't avoiding Olivia all these years, Adrian, you were running from your own damn feelings. Adrian leaned back into his leather chair, his dark eyes cold and distant. She was my brother's fiancée. She's your wife, Lucas corrected firmly. A dry, bitter laugh escaped Adrian's throat. My contract wife. He raised his left hand, staring down at the pristine platinum band catching the harsh overhead lights. I'm nothing more than a convenient backup plan, Lucas. An emergency solution. If anyone else had been standing in that room, if there had been literally any other way to shield both families from the scandal, she would have taken his hand instead. His voice was entirely flat, stripped clean of any overt emotion. But Lucas had known him long enough to hear the raw, quiet bleed beneath the words. You don't know that for sure, Lucas said gently. I do. Adrian turned his head to look out the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the gray city skyline stretch into the distance. She didn't choose me. She chose the only exit door left in a burning room. Lucas was quiet for a long beat. He studied his friend's guarded expression, then slowly pushed himself up from the chair. You know, Lucas began, stepping toward the door, sometimes life doesn't hand us what we ask for. It hands us what we're actually meant to have. Adrian glanced back at him, brow furrowed. What if, Lucas paused at the doorway, looking back over his shoulder with a faint, hopeful smile, what if Olivia was never meant for Nathaniel in the first place? What if she was always supposed to end up with you, and fate just took the most agonizing, convoluted route possible to make it happen? For the first time all day, the sharp-tongued, logical architect had no rebuttal. Lucas offered a brief nod and stepped out into the hallway, leaving Adrian alone in the quiet expanse of his office. Adrian slowly brought his left hand down, his thumb tracing the smooth, unyielding edge of the platinum ring resting on his finger. A band that was never supposed to belong to him. A symbol of a marriage built on a lie. And yet, as he sat there in the silence, he realized he couldn't bring himself to pull it off. At 6 o'clock on the dot, a sleek, jet-black Aston Martin pulled up to the curb outside the agency, its low engine purring softly against the pavement. Olivia peered through the glass doors, a small, genuine note of surprise touching her lips. He actually came. She pushed through the doors, stepping into the cool evening air, and walked up to the driver's side. Adrian pressed a button, and the dark glass lowered smoothly. "Done?" he asked, his voice low and even. Olivia nodded, hesitating for a fraction of a second before speaking up. "Can you do me a small favor?" Adrian shifted his dark gaze to her, waiting. "My colleagues, they've been talking about you all day," she admitted, her cheeks warming slightly. "They really want to meet you." She fully expected him to decline to make up a terse excuse about traffic, a late meeting, or simply brush it off as an unnecessary waste of time. Instead, the driver's side door swung open. Adrian stepped out into the twilight, the tailored lines of his dark suit cutting a sharp, lethal silhouette against the city backdrop. Without saying a word, he buttoned his jacket with a quick, practiced movement of his long fingers and walked around the hood of the car to her side. Olivia blinked, her eyes wide. "You actually agreed?" "I'm already here," he replied simply, leaning in slightly. "Lead the way." The moment the glass doors swung open and the two of them stepped into the agency lobby, every conversation in the room ground to a sudden, absolute halt. Madison's jaw practically hit her desk. She violently nudged Ryan with her elbow, whispering out of the corner of her mouth, "Oh, wow. I told you he was handsome, but wow." Ryan let out a low, appreciative whistle. "Forget handsome. Your husband looks like he just stepped off the cover of a luxury magazine." Olivia let out a small, awkward laugh, trying to steer the room away from the sudden, heavy air of intimidation. "Everyone, this is my husband, Adrian. Adrian, these are my colleagues." A chorus of enthusiastic greetings erupted from the team. Adrian gave a single, measured nod, his expression remaining perfectly composed. "It's nice to meet you all." Madison looked between the two of them, her eyes gleefully tracking every detail. "You two make such a ridiculously stunning couple." Olivia opened her mouth to offer a polite, rehearsed deflection when she felt a sudden, warm pressure rest against the small of her back. Her breath caught in her throat. Adrian gently spanned her waist with his hand, drawing her smoothly into his side until her shoulder was resting against his chest. Before she could process the shock of the contact, he reached down with his other hand and slid his long fingers through hers, entwining their grip with practiced, effortless intimacy. Olivia's head snapped up instinctively. His face was an unreadable mask. He looked entirely serene, entirely cold, completely undisturbed, as if holding her like she was the center of his universe was the most routine habit in his day. "It's just an act," she reminded herself, her pulse hammering wildly against her ribs. "He is protecting the narrative." Ryan grinned broadly at the display. "Now that is proper newlywed behavior right there." A wave of light, fond laughter swept through the office. Olivia stood frozen, the heat of his palm seeping through her silk blouse. Her heart raced not out of some foolish, grand romance, but because she was entirely unprepared for how ruthlessly convincing he could be when he decided to play a part. Adrian looked back at the group, his tone relaxing into something surprisingly warm and hospitable. "You should all come over for dinner at the house sometime. It would be our pleasure to host you." He paused, then slowly turned his head downward, his dark eyes locking onto Olivia's startled ones. A barely perceptible, dangerously soft curve touched the corner of his lips. "What do you think, babe?" Olivia's brain went entirely blank. "Babe?" For 3 terrifying seconds, her lungs refused to work. The nickname sounded surreal coming from his lips, a stark, blinding contrast to his usual sharp detachment. Catching herself just before the hesitation became obvious, she forced a bright, radiant smile to her face. "Of course. You're all welcome whenever you like." The office erupted into excited cheers and chatter about setting a date. As the team began turning back to their desks to gather their things, Olivia leaned in close, keeping her head low so her words were meant for his ears alone. "You really didn't have to call me babe," she whispered under her breath, her voice tight. Without looking down at her, Adrian tightened his grip on her hand just a fraction, his voice a quiet murmur that grazed her ear. "They're supposed to believe we're married." He paused, his eyes gleaming with a faint, unreadable shadow as he looked toward the street. And they did. Olivia stood silent beside him, the words dying in her throat. Because as infuriatingly calculated as he was absolutely right. Moonlight filtered through the sheer curtains, painting pale, silver tracks across the darkness of Olivia's bedroom. She lay perfectly still beneath the crisp linen sheets, her eyes fixed on the shadows playing against the ceiling. Sleep was an impossible stretch. Every time she closed her eyes, the quiet fragments of the day came flooding back in vivid, uninvited detail. The quiet hum of his car during the morning drive. The way he had stood at the jewelry counter, saying nothing, yet noticing the exact split second her eyes had lingered on the oval diamond. The sleek sedan waiting at the curb at 6 o'clock sharp. The warm, protective weight of his hands spanning her waist, his fingers lacing tightly through hers in front of her team. "What do you think, babe?" The low, velvet pull of his voice echoed through the quiet room, sending a strange, sudden shiver straight down her spine. Olivia lifted her left hand into the moonlight. The diamond caught the pale beam, winking back at her in the dark. "Why didn't any of it feel wrong?" she whispered into the empty air, her voice small and delicate. She closed her eyes tight, forcing her head to shake against the pillow. "No. Stop it, Olivia. You're just grateful. That's all this is." She took a slow, deep breath, trying to steady the frantic rhythm in her chest. "He stepped up when no one else would. He saved you from becoming the girl the entire city pitted." A faint, fragile smile touched her lips, only to fade into the shadows a second later. "I'm just overwhelmed by his kindness," she murmured into the dark, repeating the phrase like a solemn mantra. Over and over. As if, with enough repetition, she could finally convince her own foolish heart. Across the hallway, a thin strip of warm light spilled beneath Adrian's closed door. He sat on the edge of the mattress, his dark hair still damp from the shower, his eyes fixed on his left hand. With his right thumb, he absent-mindedly rotated the plain platinum band around his finger, a smooth, continuous motion that felt foreign and heavy against his skin. He had never pictured himself wearing a wedding ring. He certainly hadn't pictured it happening in the shadow of his brother's ghost. A small, bitter smile cut through his rigid features. "Is this really what fate wanted?" he whispered to the silence of the room. His thoughts drifted back across the hallway. He remembered the soft, genuine warmth that had lit up her face when she first slipped the diamond ring onto her finger, and the crushing, heart-wrenching shadow that replaced it when she remembered who wasn't there to buy it for her. He remembered the quiet tears she had tried to hide for Nathaniel in the dark hours of yesterday. Adrian closed his eyes, his jaw tightening until it hurt. "Then why does it feel like I'm living someone else's life?" The room offered no comfort, no answers, only the steady, heavy silence of the night. Neither of them realized that only a few feet of drywall and a narrow hallway separated their restless minds. Both staring into the dark. Both asking the very same question. Whether this marriage was merely a tragic, desperate mistake born of duty, or the quiet beginning of a story neither of them had ever seen coming. Adrian sat alone in the dim lounge, the low hum of the television flickering against the walls. He wasn't paying attention to the news anchor on the screen. Every few seconds, his dark eyes instinctively drifted toward the grand staircase. A quiet rustle of fabric and the soft tap of heels against the steps finally broke the stillness. He looked up. Olivia was descending the stairs slowly, one hand gliding along the banister. She wore a soft, blush-pink dress that cascaded gently around her ankles with every step. Her chestnut hair fell in soft, loose waves over her shoulders, framing her face, and her makeup was minimal, highlighting the natural flush of her cheeks. For a single, sudden second, Adrian forgot to breathe. She looked radiant. Entirely, effortlessly breathtaking. Olivia reached the bottom step and smoothed down the front of her dress. "Are we leaving?" Instead of answering, Adrian reached for a small, dark velvet box resting on the glass coffee table and extended it toward her. Olivia's brows pulled together in mild confusion. "What's this?" "Open it," he said, his voice flat and unreadable. She stepped closer and gently lifted the lid. Inside, resting against black velvet, was a breathtaking diamond necklace. The delicate stones caught the overhead chandelier light, fracturing it into brilliant, shimmering points of silver. Olivia's eyes widened. "Adrian," she swallowed hard. There was really no need for this. He casually shrugged, slipping his phone into his pocket. "You're my wife. You should look the part." She stared at the shimmering piece, then raised her head to look at him. It's far too expensive. I'll be waiting in the car, Adrian said simply, taking his keys off the console and walking past her toward the grand foyer. The heavy front door clicked shut behind him, leaving Olivia standing in the silence of the lounge. She looked down at the necklace once more. It was exquisite, crafted with an understated elegance that far surpassed anything in her small jewelry box. She gently snapped the lid closed. After a long beat of hesitation, she tucked the box into her clutch and walked out into the cool evening air. Adrian was already leaning back in the driver's seat when Olivia opened the passenger door and slid inside. As she settled into the leather seat, his eyes instinctively flicked down to her lap, where the velvet box rested. The necklace? He glanced up at her face. You didn't put it on. Olivia looked down at the box for a beat, then held it out toward him, a faint, tender smile playing on her lips. You bought it, she murmured, her gaze meeting his. So you should be the one to put it on. Adrian froze. He stared at her in silence, his sharp mind suddenly short-circuiting. For the first time since this madness had begun, he found himself completely at a loss for words. Without waiting for his answer, Olivia gathered her long curls, sweeping them over her left shoulder, and turned her back to him. The long, delicate slope of her neck and her bare collarbone came into full view. She waited quietly, her breath soft in the confined space of the car. Adrian reached out and carefully took the necklace from its velvet casing. His hands that were usually so unflinchingly steady whether sketching complex architectural schematics or signing million-dollar contracts felt suddenly, inexplicably clumsy. He leaned across the console. He came close enough to catch the subtle, intoxicating note of vanilla and jasmine in her perfume. Close enough to hear the quiet, steady rhythm of his own pulse pounding against his ribs. He lifted the cool metal chain around her neck. As he reached for the clasp, the warm pads of his thumbs accidentally grazed the sensitive skin at the nape of her neck. Olivia shivered, a tiny, involuntary reaction that rippled through her shoulders. Adrian's hands paused for a fraction of a second, his breath catching in his throat, before he carefully secured the clasp into place. The necklace settled perfectly along her collarbone, catching the passing streetlights. Olivia turned back around to face him, her fingers brushing lightly against the diamonds. How does it look? Adrian looked at her. The diamonds were brilliant, catching every gleam of light in the dark interior. But it wasn't the precious stones that held his gaze hostage. He caught himself before the truth could slip out. He swallowed hard, keeping his tone quiet and measured. It suits you. Olivia's smile broadened slightly, genuine and sweet. Thank you. She turned back toward the windshield, adjusting her seatbelt, entirely missing the way Adrian's eyes remained fixed on her profile for a beat longer. His fingers tightened around the leather-wrapped steering wheel until his knuckles turned pale. Is this actually happening? He thought, his chest tightening. Is she really sitting right beside me, wearing something I chose for her? He let out a slow, quiet breath to steady his frayed nerves and turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. Neither of them said a word as the car glided out onto the main road. And neither of them acknowledged the shift that for the very first time, they had shared a moment that wasn't rehearsed for an audience, wasn't forced by a matriarch, and wasn't dictated by a contract. It had simply happened. The warm, familiar scent of roasted chicken, garlic butter, and fresh baking filled the Bennett family dining room, a comforting contrast to the cold, structured world Adrian and Olivia had inhabited for the past week. The moment Olivia crossed the threshold. Liv. Chloe came tearing out of the kitchen like a whirlwind, practically throwing her arms around her older sister's neck in a suffocating hug. You look absolutely gorgeous. Before Olivia could even regain her breath, Chloe pulled back, her eyes dropping instantly to Olivia's left hand. She gasped dramatically, clutching her chest. Oh my God. The ring is even prettier up close. Her eyes darted upward, freezing on the shimmering diamond necklace resting perfectly against Olivia's collarbone. Chloe's jaw dropped as her head snapped toward Adrian, a triumphant, excited grin spreading across her face. And this necklace? Chloe squealed, looking between the two of them. Adrian, did you buy it for her? Adrian, standing tall and composed near the foyer with his hands tucked casually into his trouser pockets, offered a single, measured nod. Yes. Chloe clapped her hands together in delight. I knew it. You two are disgustingly cute, I swear. Olivia offered a strained, awkward laugh, her cheeks warming. For the next half hour, Chloe barely let Olivia breathe. She held Olivia's hand to examine the diamond cut, gushed over the necklace, scrolled through the couple's handful of polished wedding photos, and practically analyzed the cut of her blush pink dress. "You seriously look like a princess, Liv." Olivia just smiled softly, letting her younger sister carry the conversation. It was infinitely easier to play along with Chloe's excitement than to explain the soul-crushing reality of the contract sitting in a black folder back at the house. Across the long wooden table, Charles and Rebecca exchanged a quiet, loaded glance. Unlike Chloe, who was entirely dazzled by the diamonds and the fairy tale aesthetic, her parents weren't looking at the jewelry. They were looking straight into their eldest daughter's eyes at the faint, tense smile she kept forcing to her lips, and at the quiet, bone-deep exhaustion she couldn't quite mask beneath her foundation. Finally, as Chloe paused to take a sip of her juice, Rebecca reached across the table and gently laid her hand over Olivia's trembling fingers. "Olivia," her mother's voice was soft, laced with a delicate, motherly caution. "Are you happy?" The lively chatter in the room instantly ebbed away, replaced by a sudden, heavy stillness. Olivia looked up into her mother's eyes, then shifted her gaze to her father. Both of them were searching her face, waiting for the one answer that truly mattered to them. Olivia forced her shoulders to relax. She curled her lips upward into a flawless, radiant, picture-perfect smile. "So much, Mom." Charles studied his daughter's face for another long beat, searching the corners of her eyes for any trace of a lie, before he finally let out a slow breath and nodded. "If you're happy," he said softly, "that's all we ever wanted to know." Olivia lowered her eyes back down to her plate, her fingers tightening slightly against the tablecloth. "I am." Across the table, Adrian watched the entire exchange in total silence. He didn't blink, his dark gaze pinned on the subtle tension in Olivia's jaw as she lied to the people who loved her most. A moment later, Charles turned his head toward the end of the table. "And what about you, Adrian? How's married life treating you so far?" Adrian glanced at Olivia for the briefest flick of a second. Then, a slow, incredibly faint smile appeared on his usually stoic face. "It feels," he paused, waiting the word just enough to make it sound thoughtful, deliberate, and entirely genuine. "Better than I expected." Chloe clapped excitedly from her chair. "I told you. I knew you two were perfect together." Olivia looked up at Adrian in genuine shock. Throughout the rest of the meal, he wasn't just passive, he was smiling, engaging in smooth conversation, and even teasing Chloe about her university classes once or twice. Anyone watching from the outside would have sworn he was a husband head over heels in love with his new bride. His performance was completely flawless. So seamless, in fact, that a quiet, confusing doubt began to creep into Olivia's mind. He is an extraordinarily good actor, she thought silently, taking a small breath. Across the table, before Olivia could even extend her arm to reach for the water glass, Adrian picked up the crystal pitcher and refilled her glass to the brim without missing a beat in his conversation with Charles. Another subtle, protective gesture. Another layer to a masterclass performance. Or, perhaps it wasn't a performance at all. For the very first time since he had placed his signature beside hers on that paper, even Adrian couldn't tell where the act ended and where his true feelings began. The warm glow of the Bennett porch light spilled across the driveway as the family crowded near the doorway to bid them goodnight. Chloe squeezed Olivia into one last tight hug. "You have to visit again soon, Liv. It's way too quiet around here without you." "I will," Olivia promised, her smile soft and full of genuine warmth. Charles stepped forward, extending his hand to Adrian. "Take care of my daughter, Adrian." Adrian shook the older man's hand with a firm, steady grip, meeting his gaze directly. "I will." With a final nod to the family, Adrian stepped down the porch stairs first. "I'll get the car ready." Olivia stayed behind for a few extra moments, wrapping her arms around her mother for one last comforting goodbye. Outside, the cool night air cut through the summer warmth. Adrian reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a silver case, and slid a single cigarette between his lips. The sharp flick of his lighter illuminated his dark eyes for a second before the tiny orange flame went out. He took a long, slow drag, letting the heavy smoke fill his lungs before exhaling a gray cloud into the stillness. His mind was a chaotic haze torn between the strange, unscripted comfort he had felt sitting beside Olivia at her family's table and the cold, practical reality of the contract sitting back at his house. The front door clicked shut, and footsteps rustled across the gravel. Olivia walked down the porch steps, adjusting her purse over her shoulder. As she approached the passenger side, a stray breeze caught the smoke and swept it directly across her path. She stopped dead in her tracks. A sharp, violent cough tore through her throat, followed immediately by another. Her hands flew to her chest as her lungs constricted, her breathing suddenly ragged and shallow. Adrian's head snapped toward her. The cold detachment he wore like armor vanished in less than a second. Without a thought, he pitched the cigarette onto the pavement and brought his heavy leather sole down on it with a sharp crunch. Olivia. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. His hands hovered uncertainly for a split second before he placed a broad palm against her back, gently guiding her upright. Hey, look at me. Breathe slowly, he commanded, his low voice trembling with a raw, sudden edge of alarm. Olivia clutched the lapel of his jacket, trying to steady herself. After a few agonizing seconds, the air finally caught in her throat, and the heavy wheezing settled into a quiet, careful rhythm. She looked up at him, forcing an apologetic, breathless smile. I'm okay, she murmured, taking a slow, shallow breath. I have asthma. Smoke just triggers a spasm sometimes. Adrian stared down at her face. For the first time since she had entered his life, the icy mask was entirely shattered. In its place was an unmistakable, unfiltered panic. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice dropping into a thick, remorseful whisper. I had no idea. Olivia shook her head quickly. No, really, it's fine. You didn't know. No, he cut her off, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a fiercely absolute intensity. He flicked a glance down at the smoldering filter crushed against the concrete, then looked straight back into her eyes. I want to smoke again. Olivia blinked, caught entirely off guard. What? I said. Adrian took a step closer, his hand remaining steady against her back, the heat of his palm radiating through her blush dress. I want to smoke again. Not if it does that to you. There was no negotiation in his tone. No reluctant sacrifice, no polite performance for an audience, and certainly no clause in a contract demanding it. It was absolute. Unyielding. Olivia stood frozen beneath his gaze. This wasn't he, the distant, clinical man who had told her to figure it out on her first night in his house. This was a man visibly shaken by the mere thought of causing her pain even by complete accident. The cool night wind swept around them, rustling the leaves overhead, but neither moved. Olivia stared up at him, her heart thumping a heavy, irregular rhythm against her ribs, not from the lack of oxygen, but from the sudden, terrifying realization that the rigid, icy walls she had built to protect herself were beginning to crack under the quiet weight of his protection. The drive back was wrapped in a quiet, peaceful hush. Outside, the amber haze of city lights blurred into long, liquid streaks across the passenger window as the sports sedan glided through the cool night. Olivia rested her head back against the leather headrest, her mind retracing every soft, unexpected turn the evening had taken, the genuine warmth of her family's table, the smooth conviction in Adrian's voice when he defended their marriage, and the raw, unscripted panic in his eyes when she had struggled to breathe. After minutes of easy, comfortable silence, Adrian's low baritone broke through the quiet. My family is hosting a dinner next weekend. Olivia turned her head on the headrest, looking over at his profile. Adrian kept his dark eyes locked firmly on the open road ahead, his hands relaxed yet steady on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. If you're comfortable, he paused briefly, choosing his words with deliberate care. I'd like you to come. Another beat passed, the low hum of the engine filling the space between them. But if you're not ready, he added softly, it isn't a problem. We can easily make an excuse. Olivia looked at him in silence, a quiet realization dawning in her chest. Over the past week, she had begun to notice something fundamental about Adrian Sinclair. For all his rigid talk of contracts and public duty, he had never once forced her into a corner. Not about the terms of their living arrangement, not about her career, and certainly not about facing his family. In every quiet moment where he could have demanded her compliance, he had chosen to hand the power back to her instead. For a man who wore cold detachment like a second skin, he was remarkably, almost fiercely, considerate. Her gaze lingered on the sharp, clean line of his jaw and the shadow of his long dark lashes. He looked as composed and unreadable as ever, a fortress carved of stone as though he had built insurmountable walls around his heart that no one was permitted to climb. A small, faint smile touched Olivia's lips. "I'll come." Adrian's eyes flicked toward her for a quick, surprised second before returning to the road. "Olivia, you don't have to if." "I know," she interrupted gently, her voice soft but unyielding. "I know I don't have to. But I want to." Adrian swallowed hard, his hands tightening slightly on the wheel before he offered a single, concise nod. "All right." The quiet settled over the car once more as they turned onto the long, tree-lined avenue leading back to his estate. This time, however, the silence between them didn't carry the icy weight of two strangers stuck in a transaction. It felt different, lighter, warmer, and filled with a strange, unwritten understanding. Neither said another word, but as the car pulled into the driveway, Olivia realized the dark walls surrounding Adrian Sinclair weren't meant to push her away. And for the very first time, she wasn't sure if she wanted to stay outside them anymore. Dinner had started peacefully. The grand Sinclair mansion was alive with the warm hum of conversation, light-hearted laughter, and the delicate clinking of crystal glasses. William and Caroline were incredibly attentive, going out of their way to make sure Olivia felt welcomed and comfortable. Even Eleanor offered her a rare, gentle smile from across the long mahogany table. For the first time since this chaotic chapter of her life began, Olivia allowed herself to relax. She genuinely believed the night might go well. Then, the late arrivals entered the room. A few of Adrian's distant cousins strolled into the dining hall, laughing loudly among themselves. Leading the group was Preston Sinclair, boisterous, arrogant, and clearly the type of man who thrived on creating tension and making others feel small. After briefly greeting the family, Preston pulled out the chair directly opposite Olivia and dropped into it, his sharp eyes locking onto her face. "So," he smirked, his lips curling into a condescending smile. "You're Olivia." Olivia kept her composure and offered a polite, quiet smile. "It's nice to meet you, Preston." Preston let out a dry, mocking laugh. "Oh, I've heard plenty about you." Olivia's smile slowly faded as a cold knot tightened in her stomach. He leaned back, resting his arms over the back of his chair with an insufferable air of superiority. "Well, Bobby, I suppose you must be the luckiest woman in the room." The surrounding conversations ebbed away. A few family members glanced toward their end of the table. "I mean, think about it," Preston continued, his tone dripping with malice. "When Nathaniel ran away and left you high and dry, you just managed to catch Adrian instead." A few awkward, hesitant chuckles escaped from the younger cousin sitting beside him. Olivia froze in her seat. The words hit her like a physical blow, draining the color from her face. Her breath hitched in her throat, her fingers tightening around her silver fork until her knuckles turned ghostly white. Before she could process the insult or gather the strength to reply, Audrey, another cousin sitting nearby, let out a light laugh. "Honestly, I wish the rest of us had luck like yours." Swapping one Sinclair heir for another overnight. A suffocating, agonizing silence descended over the entire dining room. Olivia lowered her gaze to her plate, her eyelashes trembling as she fought back the sudden prickle of tears. She had reached her limit. She couldn't sit here and swallow their cruelty a second longer. She was just about to push her chair back and excuse herself from the table, when a harsh, metallic scrape echoed through the grand room. Adrian stood up. His posture was rigid, his expression completely blank and unreadable, terrifying mask that somehow made him look infinitely more dangerous than an outright display of rage. "I don't usually sit at a table with people like you," Adrian said. His voice was terrifyingly calm, barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the silence like a drawn blade. The room went dead quiet. Not a single breath was drawn. Adrian stared directly into Preston's eyes, his dark gaze burning with an icy fury. "She is my wife." The emphasis on those 4 words was razor-sharp. "My wife," Adrian repeated softly. "And respecting her isn't a courtesy you get to decide on. It's your absolute responsibility." Preston scoffed, rolling his eyes as he tried to laugh off the warning to save face in front of his peers. "Or what?" he sneered, tossing his napkin onto the table. "A woman who jumps seamlessly from one brother's bed to the other doesn't deserve respect. Otherwise, why would Nate?" The sentence never made it out of his mouth. Smack. The brutal, sharp crack of an open-palmed slap resonated through the cavernous dining room like a gunshot. The force of the strike sent Preston stumbling backward into his chair, his head snapping to the side as his hand flew to his burning, crimson cheek. No one moved. No one dared to breathe. Even William sat frozen in his chair, his glass suspended halfway to his mouth, completely stunned. Adrian slowly lowered his hand, his chest rising and falling in slow, controlled breaths. His voice, when he finally spoke, was pure, unadulterated ice. "Say one more word about my wife." He leaned in slightly, his dark eyes locking onto the trembling man. "And you'll forget we carry the same blood." Preston glared up at him, shock and humiliation twisting his features. You hit me over her?" Adrian didn't even grant him another glance. Instead, he turned toward Olivia, his rigid expression softening ever so slightly as he looked down at her pale, shaken face. "Let us go," he murmured gently. Olivia was still rooted to her chair, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. Adrian reached down and wrapped his broad fingers around her small, trembling hand. His grip wasn't tight, nor was it possessive. It was warm, steady, and grounding, assuring her that she wasn't standing alone in the storm. Without offering another second of his time to the room, Adrian turned on his heel and guided her out of the dining hall. Behind them, chaos erupted. William's deep voice boomed, "Adrian." Eleanor rose from her seat, her voice laced with urgent concern. "Adrian, wait." Caroline hurried after them into the grand foyer, her heels clicking frantically against the marble floor. "Adrian, please, stop." But Adrian Sinclair never looked back. He kept his arm firmly around Olivia, ushering her out into the cool night air, leaving behind the golden cage of his family to protect the woman he had promised to honor. The drive home was wrapped in a heavy, suffocating silence. Olivia stared out the passenger window, watching the blur of streetlights streak against the dark glass. She tried to stay strong. She squeezed her eyes shut and swallowed hard, desperately trying to keep her composure intact. She really did try. But Preston's voice kept replaying in her mind like a relentless, cruel echo. A woman who jumps from one brother to another. A single tear escaped her lashes, slipping down her cold cheek. Then another followed. Before she could stop herself, the dam broke, and quiet, breathless sobs began to fill the quiet cabin of the car. Adrian tightened his white-knuckled grip on the leather steering wheel until his hands shook. He heard every single sob. He felt every catch in her breath like a blade scraping against his chest. But he didn't know what to say. There were no rehearsed words, no calculated solutions capable of undoing the embarrassment and venom that had been thrown at her tonight. So he simply drove. The engine roared as he pushed the car faster than usual, slicing through the midnight streets in a desperate hurry to bring her back to safety. The second the tires ground to a halt in the driveway, Olivia pushed her door open and hurried into the house, never once looking back. She scrambled up the grand staircase, unlocked the guest room, and slammed the door shut behind her. The dam completely shattered. The tears she had been fighting back all evening finally broke free. Her knees gave out, and she slid down against the smooth wood of the door, burying her face in her hands as deep, body-racking sobs shook her frame. Outside in the dim corridor, Adrian stood motionless. His hand hovered just an inch above the brass doorknob. All his life, he had lived by a strict, logical rule: when people were hurting, you gave them space. Space was rational. Space was respectful. But standing outside her door tonight, listening to her quiet heartbreak, space felt like nothing less than abandonment. Adrian closed his eyes, exhaling a long, shuddering breath. He knocked softly. No answer. He knocked a second time, a little firmer. Still nothing but the faint sound of her weeping. Taking a slow, steadying breath, he turned the handle and gently pushed the door open. Olivia was huddled on the floor beside the heavy wooden bed frame, her knees pulled tight into her chest, crying so hard her shoulders trembled uncontrollably. The sheer vulnerability of the sight hit Adrian harder than Preston's insulting words ever could. For a long moment, he simply stood in the threshold. Unsure. Disarmed. Then, setting aside every wall he had built around himself, he walked toward her. He knelt on the floor in front of her, his tailored suit trousers pressing against the rug. His voice, when he finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. "Olivia." She didn't look up, her head still buried against her knees. "I'm sorry," he offered softly, his throat tight as he swallowed. "I should have stopped him before he ever let those words leave his mouth." Olivia shook her head, her voice broken and muffled through her tears. It wasn't your fault, you don't have to apologize. It became my responsibility the moment he insulted my wife. The declaration escaped his lips before his brain could filter it. Olivia's breathing hitched. Slowly, she lifted her face from her knees, her tear-stained eyes meeting his in the dim light. For the very first time since their contract had been drawn, Adrian wasn't speaking out of cold duty or legal obligation. He was speaking because he physically could not bear to see her in pain. Adrian reached out, his hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before his warm palm gently cupped the side of her face. His thumb moved delicately across her skin, catching a hot tear just before it reached her jawline. "Look at me, Olivia," he murmured, his voice rich with an emotion he had spent years trying to suppress. Olivia's lashes fluttered as she met his dark gaze. In the quiet shadows of the bedroom, Adrian's eyes held no trace of the unyielding, distant man he presented to the world. They were completely open, burning with a quiet, fierce tenderness that sent a soft flutter through her chest. "None of what he said was true," Adrian said softly, his touch acting as a steady anchor amidst her chaos. "You didn't jump to anyone. You were left stranded in the middle of a storm you didn't create, and you faced every single second of it with more grace than any of those people deserve." A small, hiccuping sob escaped her lips. I felt so small, Adrian. Like I was nothing more than a prize being passed along." "You are no one's second choice," Adrian stated firmly, his tone leaving no room for doubt. He shifted closer, pulling her small, trembling hands away from her face and wrapping them completely within his own broad palms. "And you sure as hell aren't a prize. You are the strongest woman I have ever met." Olivia looked down at their joined hands, feeling the steady, reassuring rhythm of his pulse against her skin. The sharp, suffocating ache in her chest began to ease, replaced by a deep, flowering warmth that spread through her veins. "Why did you hit him?" she asked softly, her voice barely a breath in the quiet room. "You could have ruined everything, your father, the family standing." The ghost of a faint, unreadable smile touched the corner of Adrian's lips, though his eyes remained intensely locked onto hers. "He crossed a line," Adrian murmured, leaning in just an inch closer. His thumb brushed gently over her inner wrist, right where her pulse was fluttering wildly. "I built this entire arrangement to protect reputations, Olivia. But tonight, I didn't give a damn about the Sinclair name. I couldn't sit there and let anyone make you feel worthless." Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs. She reached up, her own delicate fingers tentatively coming to rest against the back of his hand, the same hand he had used to defend her honor without a second thought. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes shining with fresh tears, though this time they were quiet and free of grief. "For standing up for me." Adrian didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned forward until his forehead rested softly against hers. Olivia closed her eyes, breathing in his scent, clean linen, crisp night air, and a faint hint of sandalwood. It was an unspoken vow, a quiet moment of closeness that filled the dark bedroom with a profound, undeniable comfort. "You don't ever have to thank me for protecting what's mine," he murmured softly into the narrow space between them. He stayed right there on the floor beside her, holding her hands in the quiet darkness until her breathing finally leveled into a peaceful rhythm, showing her, without ever needing to say the words, that she would never have to face the storm alone again. The quiet in the room stretched on, soft and unbroken save for the steady rise and fall of Olivia's breathing. Minutes turned into an hour. Adrian didn't move. He remained on the hard floor beside her, his forehead resting gently against hers, his broad hands keeping hers anchored and warm. Every time a stray, lingering shudder ran through her shoulders, his thumbs would stroke the backs of her wrists, offering a silent, unwavering reassurance in the dark. Gradually, the tension drained from Olivia's body. Her heavy eyelashes fluttered shut, dark against her pale, tear-streaked cheeks. The exhaustion of the day, the quiet humiliation, the suffocating rumors, and the overwhelming wave of Adrian's unexpected tenderness finally pulled her under. Her head tipped forward, her forehead slipping from his to rest softly against the front of his shoulder. Her grip on his hands loosened into total surrender. Adrian held his breath for a beat, waiting to see if she would stir. When her breathing remained deep and even, a quiet exhaled sigh left his chest. Gently, with agonizing care so as not to wake her, he untangled his fingers from hers. He shifted his weight, slipping one arm beneath her knees and the other behind her back, and lifted her off the floor in one smooth, effortless motion. Olivia murmured something soft and unintelligible into his chest, her fingers instinctively curling into the lapel of his suit jacket. Adrian's chest tightened. He carried her the few steps to the bed and laid her down on the soft mattress. Pulling the heavy duvet up over her shoulders, he tucked her in against the chill of the night. He stayed crouched by the side of the bed for a long moment, watching her sleep. Without the heavy weight of her grief holding her down, her face looked calm, almost peaceful. The dim moonlight caught the diamond ring on her left hand, glinting softly against the dark sheets. Adrian reached out, his fingers brushing a stray lock of hair away from her forehead, tucking it behind her ear. His hand lingered near her cheek for a second longer than it should have. "You're safe now, Olivia," he murmured into the quiet room, his voice a low, rough whisper that no one else would ever hear. He didn't leave right away. Instead, Adrian pulled the armchair from the corner of the room to the side of her bed and sat down. Crossing his arms, he leaned back, keeping his dark eyes fixed on her sleeping face, guarding her against the rest of the world until the first light of dawn began to bleed through the curtains. 2 months had passed since the quiet exchange of vows. Time, in its subtle and mysterious way, had begun to heal the jagged edges of Olivia's broken heart. Not all at once, never in a sudden, dramatic wave, but little by little, like a gentle tide washing over sharp stones. Nathaniel's name no longer echoed in her mind the moment her eyes opened each morning. His frantic, desperate messages had been erased. His photos had been scrubbed from her phone. Even the delicate engagement ring she had once cherished, the symbol of a future that had dissolved in a single afternoon, remained forgotten in the dark corner of her bedside drawer. It wasn't that she had stopped loving him overnight. Healing was rarely that simple. She had simply come to accept one painful, unyielding truth: the Nathaniel she had fallen in love with would never have abandoned her at the altar. Whoever had turned his back and disappeared that day was a stranger, not the man who had held her hand and promised her forever. And then there was Adrian. He remained, in every visible way, the same Adrian Sinclair. Quiet. Reserved. Terse to the point of bluntness, and almost perpetually expressionless. He rarely smiled, and he spoke only when words were strictly necessary. Yet somehow, in the quiet rhythm of shared mornings and shared space, Olivia had grown accustomed to his presence. She knew he took his coffee black, without a grain of sugar. She knew he skipped breakfast entirely whenever a critical design deadline loomed over his head. She knew he worked brutal, late hours, yet he never once forgot to send a brief, 2-line text to let her know if he wouldn't be arriving to drive her home. And Adrian, whether he realized it or not, had learned her too. He knew she couldn't properly begin her day without a steaming mug of black tea. He knew she absent-mindedly hummed soft, nameless melodies whenever she arranged fresh flowers in the vase by the window. He knew a faint, genuine warmth lit up her face every time she spotted children playing in the park. He knew she hated the sharp crack of thunder during late-night storms. Neither of them ever spoke of these small, quiet observations. Neither admitted how closely they watched the other. But over the span of 60 days, the heavy, suffocating silence between them had softened into something comfortable. It no longer felt tense or forced. It felt like home. On a crisp Monday morning, Olivia smoothed the skirt of her dress and grabbed her leather handbag from the console table. Adrian was already waiting by the front door, his car keys resting casually between his long fingers. The drive through the morning city traffic was as serene as always. No loud radio filling the air, no forced small talk. Just the quiet understanding that had grown to define their routine. When the Aston Martin pulled up to the glass entrance of Olivia's office, she reached for the door handle, turning to offer him a polite, subtle smile. "I should get inside. I'm running a bit late." Before her hand could push the door open, Adrian's low voice cut through the quiet of the car. "My firm is hosting an official dinner tonight." Olivia paused, turning back in her seat to face him. "It starts at 7, Adrian continued, keeping his gaze fixed straight ahead, his hands resting easily on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. "I'd like you to attend with me." Olivia nodded gently, not missing a beat. "All right. Wear something formal," he added, his tone calm and composed. "The room will be full of international clients and major investors." A faint, knowing smile touched the corners of Olivia's lips. "I'll be ready." She stepped out into the cool morning air. Just as she turned to close the passenger door, Adrian lowered the dark glass window. "I'll pick you up at 6 sharp, he said. Olivia gave a single, firm nod. "I'll be waiting." For a brief, suspended second, their eyes met across the threshold of the car door. There were no grand smiles. No quiet promises uttered out loud. Yet somehow, in the quiet depth of that shared look, both of them already knew the other would be there. Exactly on time. Olivia stood in front of her wardrobe, gently sliding hangers from one side of the rack to the other. Too bright, she set aside a tailored navy dress. Too simple, a structured beige piece followed it onto the bed. She sighed softly, her shoulders dropping slightly. There has to be something in here. After another minute of searching through the rows of fabric, her hand suddenly stopped. At the back of the wardrobe hung a black evening dress she had almost completely forgotten she owned. She carefully slid it off the rack and pulled it into the light. It was understated, elegant without trying too hard. The heavy satin fabric flowed down in a graceful silhouette, balanced by soft, sheer sleeves that added a touch of delicate texture. The neckline was modest, yet striking enough to hold a quiet presence. A faint smile touched Olivia's lips. I don't even remember buying this. She laid the gown flat on the bed and began to get ready. A few minutes later, she stood before the full-length mirror, inspecting her reflection. Turning to the vanity table, she reached for the small, dark velvet box Adrian had given her weeks ago. She opened it carefully, lifted the delicate diamond necklace, and reached behind her neck to fasten the clasp. The brilliant stone settled perfectly against her collarbone, standing out against the deep black fabric. She took one last glance in the glass, adjusted her hair, and headed downstairs. Adrian was waiting in the quiet expanse of the living room, standing near the grand staircase as he adjusted the cuff of his dark suit jacket. Hearing the soft, rhythmic tap of footsteps above, he casually looked up. And his chest locked. Adrian forgot to breathe. Olivia was descending the stairs slowly, one hand gliding along the dark wood of the banister. The deep black satin hugged her frame perfectly, cascading down with every step she took. Her chestnut hair fell in loose, soft waves over one shoulder, while the diamond necklace caught the warm glow of the chandelier, fracturing the light into brilliant points of silver against her skin. For the first time in a very long time, the sharp, analytical architect found himself completely immobilized. He had designed stunning modern structures. He had watched breathtaking sunsets over city skylines. He had studied flawless works of art. Yet somehow, in the quiet gravity of the moment, none of it compared to the woman walking toward him. Olivia reached the bottom step and stopped right in front of him, her eyes searching his unmoving face. Is something wrong? Her soft question pulled him back from the precipice of his own thoughts. Adrian cleared his throat, his dark eyes flicking away toward the doorway for a brief fraction of a second to regain his composure. No. A heavy, charged pause hung between them. You look, he searched his formidable vocabulary for the right word, his voice dropping an octave. Elegant. Olivia's lips curved into a soft, genuine smile, her cheeks flushing slightly. Thank you. The quiet settled back over the foyer. It wasn't awkward, nor was it tense. It was simply a deep, shared stillness. Adrian reached out and picked up the Aston Martin keys from the sleek marble console table. Shall we? Olivia gave a gentle nod. Yes. He stepped past her and opened the heavy front door, holding it steady as she brushed past him into the evening air. This time, without either of them voicing it, without a single contract clause demanding it, waiting for one another had simply started to feel like the most natural thing in the world. The grand ballroom of the Bellevue Hotel hummed with the quiet, expensive murmur of high society networking. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, glittering light over dozens of round tables, reflecting off champagne flutes and tailored tuxedos. As soon as Adrian guided Olivia through the heavy double doors with a gentle hand resting at the small of her back, the atmosphere shifted. Adrian! A sharp-looking man with silver hair and a broad smile immediately separated from a group of executives and walked over. You actually brought her. I thought you were keeping your wife hidden from the rest of the board. Adrian offered a rare, polite nod. Oliver. This is Olivia. He glanced down at her, his voice softening just enough for her to catch the shift. Olivia, this is Oliver, my Chief Operations Director. It is a genuine pleasure, Olivia, Oliver said smoothly, taking her hand in a warm, respectful greeting. Adrian has been insufferable about keeping his personal life private, but looking at you now, I can see why he'd want to keep you all to himself. Olivia smiled, her initial nerves dissolving instantly. It's wonderful to meet you, Oliver. He speaks very highly of your team. Within 20 minutes, word had spread through the hall that Adrian Sinclair's elusive wife was in attendance. Group after group came over to introduce themselves, and Olivia handled every conversation with effortless grace. She listened attentively to the senior engineers, laughed softly at the head accountant's dry humor, and asked genuine questions about the firm's recent projects. She's absolute perfection, the director of marketing whispered loudly to Adrian while Olivia was engaged in a conversation across the table. You hit the lottery, Sinclair. She's warm, articulate, and stunning. Adrian took a slow sip of his sparkling water, his dark eyes fixed on Olivia as she laughed at a story one of the senior architects was telling. I know, he murmured, the words slipping out before he could catch them. Just as Olivia was reaching for her glass of water, a sharp, confident voice cut through the ambient noise. Adrian. The crowd naturally parted to reveal a tall woman in a sleek, form-fitting crimson gown. Her dark hair was styled in a sharp bob, and her red lips were curved into a familiar, practiced smile. She carried 2 glasses of wine, walking straight past the executive board toward Adrian with an unmistakable air of authority. Veronica, Adrian acknowledged, his tone returning to its usual composed baseline. Veronica stopped right in front of him decidedly within his personal space and handed him one of the glasses with a lingering touch of her manicured fingers against his hand. You skipped the preliminary strategy meeting this afternoon, Veronica said smoothly, her voice laced with an easy, private familiarity. She reached out and casually adjusted the lapel of Adrian's suit jacket, her palm resting against his chest for a beat longer than necessary. I had to handle the Singapore investors all by myself. You owe me a drink for that. Olivia's smile froze. She stood just a step away, watching the fluid, natural way Veronica touched him a way that suggested months, if not years, of shared late nights and unspoken closeness. Adrian subtly stepped back under the guise of turning toward Olivia, breaking Veronica's touch. Veronica, I'd like you to meet my wife, Olivia. Veronica turned her head, her sharp eyes sweeping over Olivia from the diamond necklace down to the hem of her black satin dress. The briefest flash of cold evaluation crossed her features before her smile smoothed over into something overly bright, almost condescending. Ah, the famous Olivia. Veronica stepped forward, taking both of Olivia's hands in a gesture that felt entirely too loud. It is so sweet to finally meet you, darling. Adrian barely mentioned you at the office, so we were all so surprised when we heard the news. It's nice to meet you, Veronica, Olivia replied politely, though her tone had lost its previous warmth. She quietly pulled her hands back. Adrian is just such a workaholic, you see, Veronica continued smoothly, turning her shoulder slightly away from Olivia to re-engage Adrian. I swear, I spent more time with him in the design studio than anyone else alive. Remember last Tuesday, Adrian? We were locked in the conference room until 2 a.m. over the harbor schematics. Veronica let out a light, melodic laugh, reaching out to rest her hand intimately on Adrian's forearm. I honestly don't know how you survive him at home, Olivia. He is so terribly demanding. A strange, sharp sensation flared in the center of Olivia's chest. It wasn't irrational. It wasn't part of their agreement. They had built their marriage on neat boundaries, legal clauses, and quiet, unspoken rules. Yet, watching Veronica's hand resting so comfortably on Adrian's arm, hearing her lay claim to his time, his late hours, and his focus, Olivia felt a sudden, hot coil of jealousy tighten in her throat. She didn't want this woman touching him. She didn't want this woman talking to him as if she knew the intricate layers of his mind better than anyone else. Adrian's dark eyes flicked from Veronica's hand on his sleeve directly to Olivia's face. He caught the sharp, fleeting shadow across her eyes, the sudden stiffness in her shoulders, and the way her fingers tightened against her evening clutch. His jaw tightened slightly. Without breaking eye contact with Olivia, Adrian reached down, gently removed Veronica's hand from his arm, and took a deliberate step sideways. He slid his fingers through Olivia's, pulling her securely against his side until her shoulder rested against his chest. Olivia knows how I work, Veronica, Adrian said, his voice flat, cool, and entirely final. And my time after hours belongs entirely to my wife. Veronica's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a quiet shock flickering in her eyes at the cold, immediate rejection. Of course, she cleared her throat, recovering quickly. Well, I should go say hello to the board members. It was lovely meeting you, Olivia. Lovely meeting you too, Olivia said softly. Before Veronica could even fully slip away, a loud, dramatic sigh cut right through the air behind them. "Oh, thank God somebody finally put her in her place," a sharp, cheerful voice drawled. I was 5 seconds away from spilling my champagne down her back and calling it an architectural hazard. Olivia blinked, turning around just as a tall man in a flawlessly tailored tuxedo squeezed past a group of investors. He had messy dark hair, a crooked, brilliant grin, and 2 glasses of sparkling cider balanced precariously in one hand. Without waiting for an invitation, he slid right into the space Veronica had just vacated, handing one glass straight to Olivia with a dramatic flourish. "Lucas Mercer," he introduced himself, extending his free hand. "Adrian's business partner, vice president, and unfortunate for him his best friend since we were 12. Olivia took the glass, her residual jealousy evaporating into sudden amusement. "Olivia. It's so nice to meet you, Lucas." "The pleasure is all mine, trust me," Lucas said, leaning in like he was sharing a massive state secret. "I've been trying to meet you for 2 months, but Mr. Wall Street over here has been guarding you like a dragoness horde. I had to threaten to leak his embarrassing middle school photos just to get an invite to this table." Adrian let out a low, exhausted sigh, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Lucas. Please. Don't Lucas me, Sinclair," Lucas shot back, turning to Olivia with wide, theatrical eyes. "He is just mad because I saw the way his eyes nearly popped out of his head when you walked down the stairs tonight. Man looked like he forgot how oxygen works." Olivia's cheeks flared a delicate shade of pink, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "He did not." "He did," Lucas insisted, crossing his arms and nodding solemnly. "I was standing right by the bar. I thought he was having a medical emergency. I almost called an ambulance." Adrian stared at his best friend with an unreadable expression. "If you don't return to the board members, Lucas, I am cutting your project budget by 20%. See?" Lucas pointed a finger at Adrian, turning back to Olivia. "Defensive. Classic symptom of a man completely out of his depth. But seriously, Olivia, don't mind Veronica. She acts like she is his co-CEO just because she stayed up late once drinking terrible office coffee. The only thing she and Adrian ever shared was a mutual love for over-engineered blueprints and extreme stress." Olivia couldn't help it, a genuine, musical laugh bubbled up from her chest. The suffocating tightness that had gripped her moments ago completely vanished, replaced by the ridiculous warmth Lucas brought to the table. Adrian looked down at Olivia, watching the quiet joy light up her face. The exasperation in his shoulders eased just a fraction. "Anyway," Lucas continued blithely, taking a sip of his drink, "I'm officially appointing myself your personal bodyguard for the evening. If anyone else tries to hit on your husband or worse, tries to bore you with talk about Q3 revenue reports, just give me the signal. I'll execute a fake fainting spell." "I might actually hold you to that," Olivia smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Deal," Lucas grinned, turning his gaze back to Adrian, who was still holding Olivia's hand in a firm, steady grip. Lucas's eyes flicked down to their interlaced fingers, a sly, knowing smirk spreading across his face. "Look at you two," Lucas cooed loudly, making a terrible heart shape with his hands. "Hand-holding. Public displays of affection. Who are you and what have you done with the icy corporate robot I went to college with?" Adrian shot Lucas a glare cold enough to freeze liquid nitrogen, but he didn't let go of Olivia's hand. In fact, his thumb gave her knuckles a gentle, reassuring squeeze. "Go away, Mercer," Adrian said flatly, though the faintest twitch at the corner of his lips betrayed him. All right, I'm going." Lucas laughed, throwing his hands up in mock surrender as he backed away into the crowd. "It was lovely meeting you, Olivia. Keep him on a leash." As Lucas disappeared into the sea of tuxedos and evening gowns, Olivia looked up at Adrian, her laughter still lingering softly in the space between them. "He's dynamic," she offered politely. Adrian let out a quiet, amused huff, looking down at her. "He's an idiot." "He made me laugh," Olivia countered softly, tilting her head. Adrian stared down at her for a long, quiet beat. The dark eyes that had looked so fierce just minutes ago were soft now, mirroring the warm light of the ballroom. "Then I suppose," Adrian murmured, his voice dropping so low only she could hear it, "I'll let him keep his budget." The orchestra transitioned into a slow, sweeping waltz, the rich swell of violins drifting across the ballroom and filling the space with a soft, hypnotic rhythm. Couples began gliding onto the polished floor, their silhouettes shimmering beneath the warm light of the chandeliers. Olivia stood near the edge of the floor, taking a small sip of her sparkling cider while Adrian stepped away for a brief moment to greet an elder board member. "May I have the honor of this dance, Olivia?" The polite, cultured voice made her turn her head. Standing beside her was Colin Mercer, Lucas's older cousin and a prominent partner at an architectural firm. He was effortlessly charming, impeccably dressed, and wore an easy, friendly smile that held not a trace of malice. "Oh, Colin," Olivia smiled, caught pleasantly off guard. She glanced over her shoulder toward Adrian, who was still engaged in conversation. Sure. I'd love to." Colin offered a dashing bow, extending his hand. "Wonderful." Olivia placed her small hand in his, letting him lead her into the middle of the floor. They stepped smoothly into the rhythm of the music, Colin keeping a respectful distance as he spun her into a gentle turn. Across the room, Adrian concluded his conversation and turned back. His eyes swept the floor and immediately locked onto Olivia. He didn't rush forward in a fit of rage, nor did he storm over to cause a scene. Instead, he simply watched her. Her cheeks were flushed, her satin dress catching the light as she moved gracefully. But as he watched Colin's hand resting casually at her waist, a quiet, irresistible magnetic pull took over. Adrian set his glass down on a passing waiter's tray and walked toward the dance floor with a smooth, unhurried grace. As the music crested into a softer verse, Colin felt a light, steady tap on his shoulder. He turned to see Adrian standing there, his expression remarkably composed, but his dark eyes burning with an undeniable, quiet intensity. "Mind if I take over, Colin?" Adrian asked softly, his tone completely smooth. Colin glanced between Adrian's steady gaze and the subtle heat radiating off him. A knowing, amused smile touched Colin's lips. "Not at all, Sinclair. She's wonderful." Colin stepped back with a polite nod, fading into the surrounding couples. Before Olivia could even process the sudden switch, Adrian closed the distance. He didn't snatch her hand or pull her harshly. Instead, his broad palm slid fluidly around her waist, his touch warm and electric even through the fabric of her dress. His other hand gently engulfed hers, his fingers weaving loosely, seamlessly through her own. Olivia's breath hitched in her throat. The moment his chest met hers, a sudden, heavy wave of heat coursed through her veins. Colin's lead had been light and polite, but Adrian's presence was entirely overwhelming, a silent, gravitational pull she had no power to resist. Adrian guided her into the sway of the music with effortless, commanding elegance. "I leave you alone for 2 minutes," Adrian murmured, his voice dropping into a low, velvet baritone right against her ear, "and you're already lighting up the dance floor with someone else." Olivia looked up, her eyelashes fluttering as she met his dark gaze. There was no anger in his face, just a deep, intoxicating focus centered entirely on her. "He was just being nice," Olivia whispered, though her voice trembled slightly. She tried to maintain her composure, but the sheer proximity of him, the clean scent of sandalwood, the steady beat of his heart under her palm was making it impossible to think clearly. "You were busy." "I'm never too busy for you," Adrian replied softly, his thumb tracing a tiny, deliberate circle against the small of her back. The subtle gesture sent a shiver straight down her spine. Olivia felt her remaining defenses completely dissolve. Instead of stepping back or keeping a polite distance, her fingers acted on their own, sliding up from his shoulder to rest against the back of his neck, her fingers trailing into the soft hair at his nape. Adrian's dark eyes darkened further at her reaction, a subtle flare of satisfaction softening his features. He drew her just an inch closer, their steps synchronized so perfectly it felt as if they were the only two people in the crowded ballroom. "You're staring," Olivia murmured, her heart thumping at erratic rhythm against her ribs as she looked into his eyes. "I can't help it," Adrian admitted, his voice remarkably raw, devoid of any corporate polish or guarded walls. "You look breathtaking tonight, Olivia. I didn't want to share a single second of it." Olivia's breath caught again, her lips parting slightly. It wasn't a fierce, possessive claim, it was a quiet, devastating confession. The grand ballroom, the glittering lights, and the hushed whispers of high society all melted into a distant blur. Olivia leaned in slightly, resting her temple against the sturdy line of his shoulder as they glided beneath the chandeliers, completely surrendering to the quiet fire building between them. The city lights stretched endlessly outside the car windows, painting long, liquid streaks of gold and amber across the dark interior. The engine clicked softly as Adrian cut the power, plunging the cabin into a thick, intimate hush. Neither of them moved. Neither reached for the door handle to break the spell. The silence lingered, heavy and electric, humming with everything left unsaid. Adrian turned his head slowly, his dark eyes finding hers in the dim shadows. "Thank you," his voice was a low, rough rasp that vibrated straight through her chest. "For tonight." Olivia offered a soft, breathless smile. "There was nothing to thank me for." "It was my responsibility," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips before flicking back up to her eyes. Olivia smiled, a playful warmth dancing in her chest. "You use that word a lot." Adrian couldn't fight the slow, arresting curve of his own mouth. For the first time, the word didn't feel like a cold contract or an obligation. It felt like an anchor. It felt like something he wanted to claim. He shifted in his seat, closing the small physical distance between them. Olivia didn't lean back. She watched him approach, her pulse hammering wildly against her throat. The air between them suddenly felt too thin, heated by the proximity of their bodies. When only inches separated them, Adrian raised a hand. His broad palm cupped the side of her face, his thumb tracing a slow, burning path across her cheek before resting against the corner of her lower lip. Olivia's breath hitched, her eyes fluttering half closed as she leaned instinctively into his touch. Adrian didn't hesitate anymore. He closed the remaining gap, pressing his lips to hers. It wasn't a hesitant brush of restraint. The moment his mouth met hers, a low, ragged sigh escaped him, and the carefully built walls he had maintained for months shattered. His kiss deepened instantly, hot and demanding yet terrifyingly tender. Olivia gasped softly against his mouth, a shiver racing down her spine. Her hands, acting entirely on their own accord, flew up to grip the lapels of his suit jacket, pulling him closer, anchoring him to her. Adrian groaned low in his throat. His free hand slid from her waist, tangling into the soft waves of her hair, tilting her head back to give him deeper access. He tasted like expensive scotch and the warm night air, his lips molding against hers with an intensity that made the world outside spin off its axis. Every brush of his tongue, every friction of his mouth against hers sent a wave of liquid heat pooling low in her stomach. Olivia kissed him back with a sudden, fierce hunger she hadn't known she possessed, her fingers clutching tighter at his jacket as her senses overloaded. When Adrian finally pulled back reluctantly, gasping for air as his forehead rested against hers, his chest heaved heavily beneath her hands. His dark eyes were dilated, burning with a raw, unfiltered desire that defied every rule they had ever set. For a long, breathless second, neither of them moved. Then reality crashed over him like a cold wave. Adrian stiffened. The heat vanished from his eyes, replaced by a sudden, stark panic. He dropped his hand from her face as though he had been burned, violently recoiling into his side of the car. He dragged a shaking hand through his dark hair, unable to look her in the eye. His chest rose and fell in jagged, uneven breaths. "I'm so sorry." His voice was laced with sharp, agonizing regret. "I shouldn't have done that. I lost control." Olivia sat frozen, her lips still tingling, her body aching with a sudden, abrupt emptiness. She opened her mouth, desperate to tell him it was all right, that she didn't regret a single second. "Good night, Olivia," he choked out, his voice tight. Before she could form a single word, Adrian shoved his door open, stepped out into the night, and strode toward the house. His footsteps were fast, almost desperate. A few seconds later, the heavy thud of his bedroom door echoed upstairs, sealing him away. Olivia remained alone in the passenger seat. Slowly, her trembling fingertips rose to touch her swollen lips. The kiss hadn't been brief or gentle at all. It had been scorching, desperate, and entirely consuming. And as she sat there in the dark, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. There was no going back. 2 days passed. Olivia hadn't gone to work. She had called Harper at the office, offering a quiet, vague excuse about not feeling well. The truth was, she didn't know what was wrong with her. Ever since that night in the car, ever since the raw, breathless heat of his lips against hers, her heart had felt unusually heavy. Her skin still felt hypersensitive, as if the memory of his touch was permanently branded into her. She tried reading. She tried watching television. She even spent an hour in the sunroom, meticulously trimming and rearranging the fresh white lilies in the glass vases. Nothing helped. Again and again, her traitorous thoughts wandered back to Adrian. The heavy mahogany grandfather clock in the foyer struck 11. 11 p.m. Olivia glanced toward the front door for what felt like the 100th time that evening. Still no sign of him. She frowned, setting her lukewarm mug of tea on the glass coffee table. This wasn't tea like Adrian. No matter how demanding his schedule was, no matter how intense a board meeting got, he always sent a message. Running late. Don't wait up for dinner. Leaving the office now. Short, precise, reliable. Always. Tonight, nothing. Silence. She picked up her phone from the cushion beside her. No missed calls. No unread notifications. A strange, cold knot began to tighten in the center of her chest. She opened his contact and pressed dial. The number you are calling is currently switched off or out of coverage area. Please try again later. Her heartbeat quickened, a sudden flutter of anxiety catching in her throat. That's strange. She pressed redial, holding the phone tightly against her ear. The same computerized voice answered her. Olivia stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the front gates. The driveway was empty, dark, and glistening under a sudden summer downpour. Heavy rain had begun to fall outside, sheets of water slanting against the glass. Each passing minute made her more restless. What if his meeting just ran late? She whispered into the empty, quiet living room. What if his phone battery died? She shook her head. No. He keeps a charger in his car. He would be, told me. She sat back down on the sofa, only to stand right back up seconds later. She couldn't stay still. Her hands were cold, her fingers trembling slightly as she checked the clock again. 11:24 p.m. Then, her phone vibrated violently in her palm. An unknown number flashed on the screen. Olivia answered on the very first ring, pressing the phone frantically to her ear. Hello? Am I speaking with Mrs. Sinclair? A solemn, professional male voice spoke over the receiver. Yes, Olivia replied, her breath hitching, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, this is she. This is the emergency department at City General Hospital. Olivia's heart stopped. The blood drained completely from her face. I'm calling regarding Mr. Adrian Sinclair. Olivia gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white, her knees threatening to give out beneath her. What happened? Is he with you? There has been a severe road accident on the highway, the administrator replied calmly, though the urgency in his background environment was palpable. Sirens, loud announcements, and running footsteps echoing through the line. Mr. Sinclair's vehicle was involved. His personal assistant wasn't reachable, but we found your number listed in his phone as his primary emergency contact and spouse. For a moment, Olivia couldn't hear anything else. The room seemed to tilt on its axis, the hum of the house fading into a high-pitched, suffocating ringing in her ears. Adrian, her lips trembled violently as a tear escaped her eye. Is he okay? Please tell me he is okay. There was a brief, excruciating silence on the other end of the line. I need you to come to the hospital immediately. Enter through the trauma center. The call went dead. Olivia stood frozen in the middle of the dark living room. The phone slowly slipped from her numb fingers, tumbling onto the thick rug with a soft thud. It felt as though the ground had been violently torn away from beneath her feet. No, she whispered into the darkness, her chest heaving as terror flooded every corner of her mind. No. No, no, no. Without stopping to grab a coat, without changing out of her clothes, she grabbed her car keys from the table and sprinted out into the pouring rain. For the first time since their contract marriage began, Olivia wasn't thinking about rules. Or legal clauses. Or Nathaniel. She had only one desperate, agonizing prayer echoing through her heart with every beat of her pulse. Please. Adrian, don't leave me too. Olivia rushed into the hospital, her breathing uneven and ragged. The emergency department was crowded and chaotic. Doctors hurried from one patient to another, while nurses pushed stretchers through the busy corridors under the harsh fluorescent lights. She looked around frantically, her hands shaking. Excuse me, she stopped in front of the reception desk, clutching the marble edge to steady herself. I'm looking for Adrian Sinclair. The nurse quickly checked the computer, her eyes scanning the system. Mrs. Sinclair? Olivia nodded immediately, her voice breaking. Yes, I'm his wife. Please come with me. Without wasting another second, Olivia followed her through the maze of long hallways. Her heart pounded louder with every step, the sharp smell of antiseptic making her stomach twist in knots. The nurse stopped outside a private cabin and gently pushed the door open. Yes, inside. Olivia didn't wait. She rushed in. Adrian. Adrian looked up from the hospital bed. His right arm was secured in a clean white cast, hanging in a black canvas sling. A few small cuts marked his cheek and the sharp line of his forehead, and small bandages covered the scrapes on his left hand. He looked tired, exhausted down to his bones, but he was alive. The moment Olivia saw him, every single ounce of paralyzing fear she'd been holding back since the phone call broke completely free. She ran straight to the side of the bed. Before Adrian could say a single word, she leaned in and wrapped her arms around him, carefully avoiding his injured shoulder and pressing herself against him as if to prove he was real. Adrian, her voice trembled, thick with tears. Are you okay? I was so scared. Tears spilled over her eyelashes, wetting the fabric of his hospital gown. When they called. I thought I lost you. Adrian froze. Olivia had never hugged him like this before, never held on to him as though losing him would tear her apart. Slowly, carefully, he lifted his uninjured left arm and wrapped it firmly against her waist, pulling her closer until her head rested right over his beating heart. I'm okay, Olivia, he murmured, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. I promise, it looks worse than it actually is. Olivia pulled back just enough to look up into his face, her hands resting lightly on his uninjured shoulder. You call this okay? She gestured toward the sling with a tearful glare. Your arm is fractured. You have cuts all over your face. You scared me to death, Adrian. Adrian looked at her quietly, taking in her swollen eyes, her disheveled hair from the rain, and the raw devotion written across every line of her face. I'm sorry, he whispered gently. I didn't mean to make you cry. Olivia shook her head, a tear dropping onto his collarbone. Don't apologize. She swallowed hard, her chest heaving as she held his gaze. Don't ever do this to me again. For a brief, suspended moment, neither of them moved. Neither of them noticed how close their faces were, or how his left hand was still resting possessively against the small of her back. A soft, polite knock came from the doorway, breaking the spell. The attending nurse offered a warm, subtle smile at the scene before stepping into the room. Mrs. Sinclair? Olivia quickly stepped back, turning her face away to wipe the fresh tears from her cheeks. Yes? The doctor has finished signing off on his discharge papers, the nurse said, handing Olivia a small paper bag filled with pain medications and prescriptions. All the formalities are clear. You can take your husband home now. Olivia took the bag, nodding gratefully. Thank you so much. As the nurse smiled and stepped back out into the corridor, Adrian shifted his legs over the edge of the bed. He looked up at Olivia through his dark lashes, a faint, lopsided smile appearing on his lips despite the obvious pain radiating from his arm. So, he murmured, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a quiet warmth. I guess I'm your responsibility tonight. Olivia looked at him, her eyes still shining with residual tears, but her expression softening into something deep, steady, and unbreakable. She reached out and gently took his good hand into both of hers, lacing her fingers securely through his. Not tonight, she whispered softly, leaning in to press a gentle, lingering kiss to his uninjured cheek. Always. The drive back from the hospital passed in a quiet, grounded calm. The torrential rain outside had slowed to a gentle drizzle, leaving the wet roads gleaming under the streetlights. Once they reached the house, Olivia helped Adrian inside, carefully supporting his good side as they walked through the front doors. She led him toward his bedroom before stepping toward the kitchen. I'll bring you something warm, she called softly over her shoulder. Sit down and rest. A few minutes later, she returned carrying a tray with a bowl of hot, steaming soup. She used her elbow to knock softly on his bedroom door. Adrian? There was no answer, just a faint, frustrated grunt from inside. She slowly pushed the door open with her foot. The sight in front of her made her bite back an immediate, reluctant laugh. Adrian stood beside the foot of the bed, his crisp dress shirt hanging awkwardly only half unbuttoned. His fractured arm, locked tightly in its sling, made the simplest task of twisting and pulling the fabric almost impossible. Judging by the rumpled state of the collar and his darkened expression, he had been engaged in a fierce battle with his own clothing for quite a while. Olivia couldn't help herself. A small, genuine laugh escaped her lips. Adrian snapped his eyes toward her, his jaw setting into a tight line. It's not funny. Oh, it definitely is, she teased softly, placing the soup tray on the bedside table and walking over to him. Come here. Adrian stepped back slightly, his pride flaring. I can do it. You've been doing it for half an hour, she pointed out, raising an eyebrow. Without waiting for his permission, she gently brushed his good hand away from his chest. Stop being stubborn, Adrian. She reached for the top remaining button, her slender fingers working efficiently down the row. As she gently unbuttoned the front, her warm knuckles brushed against the heated skin of his chest. Carefully, she slipped the collar off his uninjured shoulder first, then eased the sleeve down over his cast with agonizing care so as not to jar his arm. As the heavy dress shirt fell away and landed on the floor, Olivia instinctively looked up. And froze. She hadn't quite expected what lay beneath the tailored suits he wore every day. Adrian possessed a breathtaking, well-built physique, broad shoulders, deeply defined chest muscles, and a taut stomach. A few small, faded scars were scattered across his chest, along with fresh pink scrapes from the collision. Without realizing it, Olivia stared. Her eyes lingered on the hard line of his collarbone, the steady rise and fall of his chest, and the sheer strength he carried so effortlessly. Adrian noticed her reaction immediately. His dark gaze dropped to her face, a subtle, dangerous warmth glinting in his eyes. Finished? His low, calm voice pulled her sharply back to reality. Olivia blinked, her breath catching in her throat. What? You've been staring. I was not. Her cheeks turned a bright, undeniable shade of crimson. She quickly looked away toward the carpet, her pulse fluttering wildly. I was just checking to see if there were any other injuries you forgot to mention to the doctor. A faint, rare smile appeared on Adrian's lips, his voice dropping an octave. Right. Of course. Extremely flustered, Olivia quickly reached for a loose, soft black t-shirt resting on the bed. Lift your head, she instructed, trying to regain her composure. You only have one working arm, she muttered under her breath, avoiding his gaze as she prepped the shirt. So just let me help. This time, Adrian didn't argue. A quiet amusement washed over his features as he lowered his head, letting her carefully slip the wide neckline over his head and guide his good arm through the sleeve. There. Olivia let out a soft breath, smoothing the cotton fabric over his chest. Much better. She stepped back, retrieving the bowl of soup from the bedside table. Eat this before it gets completely cold. Adrian reached for the spoon with his left hand. I've got. Before he could finish his sentence, his unaccustomed non-dominant hand fumbled. The silver spoon slipped from his grip, dropping back into the broth with a soft splash. Olivia looked at his heavy arm cast, then looked up into his resigned face. Without saying a word, she pulled the plush armchair closer and sat down on the edge of the bed right beside him. She picked up the spoon, scooped a small portion, and blew gently on the steaming soup. Then she held it out steady in front of him. Adrian stared at the spoon, then at her. Olivia. What? I can manage. She raised an eyebrow, holding the spoon unwavering in midair. With your left hand? You can barely hold a pencil with your left hand. Adrian went silent, his lips setting into a flat line. I'll eat slowly. Olivia smiled, a soft, teasing light dancing in her eyes. And by the time you're finished, it'll be time for breakfast. Despite himself, Adrian let out a quiet, rough laugh. It was small, unpracticed, but entirely real. Olivia's heart did a strange, delightful flip at the sound. She smiled back, her gaze softening. Open your mouth. Adrian sighed with dramatic reluctance, his dark eyes fixed entirely on hers. I've survived hostile takeovers with international investors, and now I'm being treated like a helpless child. Exactly, Olivia replied smoothly. So behave like one. Adrian shook his head in absolute defeat, a quiet warmth softening his harsh features as he leaned in and accepted the spoon. Olivia continued feeding him, one careful spoonful at a time. Neither of them spoke, but the silence hanging in the dimly lit bedroom had shifted completely. It was no longer heavy, guarded, or formal. It was intimate, comfortable, and deeply familiar. After the last spoonful was gone, Olivia set the empty bowl back on the tray. There. You've officially survived dinner. Adrian didn't look at the tray. He looked at her face, his dark eyes tracing the delicate line of her jaw, her warm eyes, and the faint flush still lingering on her cheeks. Thank you, he said softly. There was no corporate polish, no sarcastic edge, and no teasing in his tone this time. Only raw, unshielded sincerity. Olivia met his gaze, her heart hammering steady and warm against her ribs. She smiled softly. You don't have to thank me, Adrian. You'd do the exact same thing for me. Adrian held her gaze, the intensity of his eyes catching her breath. Without a single second of hesitation, he answered honestly. I would. For a long, suspended moment, neither of them looked away. The ambient light of the room seemed to shrink, wrapping them in an unspoken world of their own. And for the first time since their contract marriage had been signed, taking care of one another no longer felt like a clause, a duty, or a staged performance for the world. It felt completely natural and entirely undeniable. A month later. Today was the day Adrian's cast was finally coming off. Olivia had been beside him through every single step of his recovery, every hospital follow-up, every dressing change, and every frustrating moment when he couldn't accomplish even the simplest tasks on his own. She was the one who gently reminded him to take his daily pain medication. She was the one who carefully buttoned his crisp dress shirts every morning. She had even looked up tutorials online to learn how to tie a perfect Windsor knot with one hand, standing on her tiptoes in front of him every single morning before he left for work. Without either of them explicitly stating it, they had started living like a real married couple. The heavy, cautious distance that had once defined their arrangement had quietly dissolved. It hadn't vanished completely overnight, but enough that the quiet moments between them no longer felt empty or lonely. It felt whole. The orthopedic doctor smiled as he inspected the fresh X-rays after removing the fiberglass cast. It's healed remarkably well, Mr. Sinclair, he noted, signing off on the chart. Just don't put too much heavy strain on the joint for another couple of weeks. Adrian flexed his hand, testing the motion of his wrist. Thank you, doctor. As they stepped out through the main glass doors of the hospital into the bright afternoon sun, Olivia suddenly grabbed his good elbow and changed directions. This way, she said, pulling him toward the crosswalk. Adrian looked down at her, raising an eyebrow in amusement. Where are we going? The driver is waiting in the parking garage. Olivia looked back at him, a mischievous, sparkling smile gracing her lips. I've decided we're celebrating. Before Adrian could ask another question, she guided him across the street toward a charming, cozy little bistro tucked between the high-rise office buildings. It had warm yellow lighting glowing from within, dark wood framing, and overflowing flower boxes hanging neatly beneath the open windows. Adrian glanced up at the painted sign above the door. You've been here before? Olivia nodded, her eyes shining. It's my favorite place in the city. I used to come here all the time. Adrian looked at her with mild surprise, his dark gaze lingering on her face. You never told me about this place. Olivia gave a small, light-hearted shrug. You never asked. The corner of Adrian's mouth twitched into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Fair enough. She laughed softly, the sound clear and bright against the afternoon noise of the city streets. And honestly, there was never really a chance to tell you before now. Adrian reached past her, holding the heavy wooden entrance door open. After you, Mrs. Sinclair. Olivia walked inside, taking a deep breath. The rich, mouth-watering aroma of freshly baked artisan bread, rich herbs, and grilled food instantly brought a soft, nostalgic smile to her face. I missed this place, she whispered. A polite hostess greeted them and led them to a quiet, intimate booth tucked away by a large arched window overlooking the courtyard. As they settled into the plush leather seats, a waiter approached their table with 2 leather-bound menus. Good evening, welcome. What can I get started for you today? Olivia barely opened the menu before closing it again, her eyes flashing with quiet confidence. I already know what I want. She leaned across the table, her dark eyes locking onto Adrian's with a playful, affectionate warmth that made his pulse skip a beat. And I think you're going to like it too. Olivia ended up ordering a bottle of rich red wine for the table. Adrian, mindful of his newly removed cast, kept his intake to a single glass, but Olivia, finally letting her guard down after weeks of intense worry and hospital visits, found herself sipping far past her usual limit. By the time the main courses were cleared away, the alcohol had softened every rigid defense she had built around her heart. Her cheeks wore a high, rosy flush, and her laughter came light and uninhibited. You know, Olivia giggled softly, propping her chin on her hand as she rested her elbow against the tablecloth, You look much less scary when you aren't wearing a tailored three-piece suit. Adrian looked at her over his water glass, his dark eyes brimming with quiet, protective warmth. Is that so? Hm, she nodded earnestly, her words slightly slurred but remarkably clear in their sincerity. You're actually very gentle, Adrian. Even if you try your absolute hardest to pretend you aren't. Adrian set his glass down, leaning forward slightly. Olivia, I think you've had enough wine for tonight. Let us get you home. He signaled for the check, paid swiftly, and guided her out of the restaurant with his hand resting firmly against her waist to keep her steady. The cool night air hit her face as they stepped onto the curb, making her lean heavier against his chest. During the drive back, Olivia didn't close her eyes. She spent the entire trip turned sideways in the leather seat, simply staring at his side profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the steady focus in his dark eyes, and the way his hands held the steering wheel. When they finally arrived home, Adrian helped her through the front door and up the quiet, dimly lit staircase to her bedroom. All right, Adrian murmured softly, stepping back once they reached the side of her bed. Get some sleep. I'll ask the housekeeper to bring you tea in the morning. As he turned to leave, Olivia's hand shot out, her fingers catching the sleeve of his jacket. Adrian, wait, she breathed out, her voice suddenly trembling. Adrian paused, looking down at her hand on his arm before meeting her eyes. What is it? Are you feeling sick? Olivia shook her head slowly. She took a small, unsteady step closer to him, closing the distance until she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. The fog of the alcohol was there, but beneath it lay a truth that had been quietly building inside her for months, through every shared meal, every late-night hospital vigil, and every time he had stood between her and the world. She looked straight up into his eyes, completely unshielded. I don't care about the contract anymore, she whispered, her voice breaking softly in the quiet bedroom. Adrian froze, his breathing catching in his throat. Olivia, you're drunk. I am, she admitted, tears suddenly shimmering in her dark eyes, bright and undeniable. I am drunk, Adrian. But I'm not lying. I haven't been thinking about Nathaniel for a very long time. I haven't been thinking about the arrangement, or the rules, or what anyone else expects of us. She reached up with her free hand, her warm palm coming to rest flat over his chest, right over his hammering pulse. I only think about you, she whispered, a quiet tear slipping down her flushed cheek. I think about how you stayed with me, how you protected me, how safe I feel whenever you're near me. Adrian stared at her, his jaw tightening as he fought to keep his composure, his own pulse racing wildly beneath her fingertips. Olivia, his voice dropped to a low, breathless whisper, raw with a mix of disbelief and intense restraint. I love you, Adrian, Olivia confessed, the words pouring from her heart finally, pure and unreserved. I'm not doing this because of a contract. I love you. The silence in the room became absolute, charged with a sudden, overwhelming electricity. Adrian didn't pull away. He looked down at her tear-stained, breathless face, his dark eyes burning with an emotion he could no longer suppress, the realization that the woman he had vowed to protect had given him her heart in return. Adrian remained frozen, her confession lingering in the quiet air between them like a physical force. Her warm palm was still pressed flat against his chest, right where his heart was hammering out an erratic, uncharacteristic rhythm. The fierce restraint he had maintained for months, the careful distance, the neat boundaries, the cold discipline was crumbling, piece by piece. Olivia, he rasped, his voice dropping an octave, low and thick with a raw, undeniable tension. Her heavy eyelids fluttered up to meet his gaze. The soft flush on her cheeks, the slight tremble of her parted lips, and the absolute trust shining in her dark, glassy eyes undid him completely. Adrian reached up, his large, warm hand cupping the side of her neck, his fingers threading gently into her soft hair. He pulled her a fraction of an inch closer until her quiet, hitching breath brushed against his lips. For a heartbeat, the air turned entirely electric. He wanted to pull her in, to kiss her until neither of them remembered the contract, the past, or the rules they had set. Do you have any idea what you're saying to me? He whispered against her skin, his chest rising and falling in heavy, uneven breaths. His thumb traced a slow, burning path over her cheekbone, wiping away a stray tear. If you don't mean it, tell me now, Olivia. Because after tonight, I want to let you go. Olivia didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into his palm, sighing softly as her fingers tightened in the fabric of his shirt. I mean it, she breathed, her voice slurring slightly with exhaustion and the heavy fog of the wine. I mean every word, Adrian. Her head suddenly grew heavy. The overwhelming rush of emotion, combined with the alcohol and the long, exhausting emotional release of the evening, finally caught up with her. Her eyelashes fluttered shut, dark and long against her skin. Her knees buckled just a fraction, her weight collapsing entirely against his chest. Adrian caught her immediately, his arms wrapping around her waist in a smooth, effortless motion to keep her from falling. "Olivia," he murmured, a low, quiet chuckle breaking through his own ragged breathing. There was no answer. Just the soft, rhythmic hum of her breath against his neck. She was fast asleep, her face buried comfortably into the crook of his collarbone, her small hand still clutching his jacket as if anchor-bound. The heavy, charged heat in the room gradually melted into a profound, aching softness. Adrian let out a long, shuddering exhale, resting his forehead against her dark hair for a quiet moment. He allowed himself a single, rare, genuine smile, one filled with a warmth he no longer had any desire to hide. Carefully, so as not to startle her, he shifted his uninjured arm beneath her knees and lifted her off her feet. He carried her the few paces to her bed and laid her down on the soft sheets with agonizing gentleness. He leaned over to unlace her heels, setting them aside, and pulled the plush comforter up to her chin, tucking her in against the night chill. As he went to pull back, Olivia stirred, whimpering softly at the sudden loss of heat. Her hand reached out blind in her sleep, her fingers catching his wrist and tugging, weak but persistent. "Adrian," she murmured into her pillow, her voice barely a whisper. "Stay." Adrian stopped. He looked at her small hand wrapped around his wrist, then down at her peaceful, resting face. Without a word, he kicked off his shoes and slid onto the top of the bed beside her. He pulled her carefully against his side, letting her head rest over his chest. Olivia instantly relaxed, her sigh warm against his collarbone as she curled into him, her hand coming to rest right over his heart. Adrian wrapped his arm securely around her shoulders, resting his chin on top of her head. Listening to the quiet, steady rhythm of her breathing, he closed his eyes, holding her tight through the dark until the morning light. Morning light filtered through the sheer curtains, casting a soft, golden glow across the bedroom. Olivia stirred lazily, shifting against the deep, surrounding warmth that had kept her safe and grounded all night. Her head was pillowed on something solid and broad, rising and falling in a slow, rhythmic cadence. She blinked against the morning sun, her eyelashes fluttering open. The initial hazy fog of sleep slowly cleared, revealing a dark cotton shirt just inches from her face, and beneath her hand, resting flat against a steady, quiet heartbeat, were her own fingers, still holding tight to his fabric. Olivia froze, her breath catching softly in her throat. She looked up. Adrian was awake. He was lying on his back, his uninjured arm wrapped securely around her waist, holding her flushed against his side. His dark hair was slightly tousled from sleep, falling across his forehead in a way she had never seen before. He was looking straight down at her, his dark eyes brimming with a quiet, unshielded intensity that made her pulse flutter wildly. For a long, breathless moment, neither of them moved. Memory came rushing back to Olivia in a sudden, overwhelming wave: the wine at the bistro, the quiet ride home, the heavy tears on her cheeks, and the raw, unfiltered confession she had whispered right against his chest. "I love you, Adrian." A wave of crimson heat surged from her neck straight to her cheeks. She gasped quietly, her eyes widening as she tried to pull back into the pillows. "Adrian." His arm around her waist tightened just a fraction, keeping her right where she was. "Good morning," Adrian murmured, his morning voice low, deep, and slightly raspy. Olivia covered her face with both hands, her voice muffled against her palms. "Oh my God. Please tell me I didn't say everything I think I said last night." A low, quiet rumble of laughter vibrated through Adrian's chest, a sound so rare and genuine that Olivia parted her fingers just enough to peek through at him. The corner of his mouth was lifted in a warm, teasing smile. "Which part?" he asked softly, his dark eyes dancing with quiet amusement. "The part where you told me I was gentle? Or the part about the contract?" Olivia groaned, burying her face into his chest again to hide her burning blush. "I was drunk. The wine was too strong. I was rambling." Adrian's hand moved from her waist up to her jaw. His long fingers gently caught her chin, lifting her face back up until she had no choice but to meet his gaze. The teasing light in his eyes vanished, replaced by a deep, unwavering sincerity that made the breath stay trapped in her lungs. "Were you rambling, Olivia?" he asked softly, his thumb resting lightly against her cheekbone. Or was it the truth? Olivia's heart hammered furiously against her ribs. Looking into his dark, intense gaze, she realized there was no hiding anymore. No boundaries left to hide behind. No rules left to protect her heart. She let out a soft, shaky breath, her hand coming up to rest over his broad wrist. It was the truth, she whispered, her voice clear and steady despite her racing heart. Every word. The silence in the room stretched between them, warm and profoundly still. Adrian didn't say a word. Instead, he leaned down slowly, his dark eyes holding hers until his lips met the crown of her forehead in a long, quiet kiss. He rested his forehead against hers, his thumb stroking her cheek in a gentle, reassuring rhythm. Good, Adrian murmured against her skin, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer cared to hide. Because I'm not letting you take it back. Adrian kept his forehead rested against hers for a few heartbeats longer, his thumb continuing its slow, soothing sweep over her cheek. Then, with an agonizingly slow exhale, he leaned back, his eyes searching hers with a heavy, unspoken promise. As much as I want to stay right here and hold you to every single word, Adrian murmured, his voice still low and raspy from sleep, I have a board meeting at 9. Olivia blinked, the lingering haze of sleep and high emotion suddenly interrupted by the cold reality of his morning schedule. Wait, today? Today, Adrian confirmed, a faint, rueful smile touching the corner of his lips. He shifted, slowly loosening his arm from around her waist though his hand lingered against her hip for a beat longer than necessary before he pulled away entirely. The Singapore contract finalization. Lucas will personally set my office on fire if I'm late. Olivia sat up, clutching the comforter to her chest as she watched him swing his legs over the edge of the bed. The crisp air of the room hit her skin where his warmth had been just seconds before, making her miss him immediately. Adrian stood up, running a hand through his dark, messy hair. He turned back to look down at her, his dark eyes burning with an intense, quiet gravity that made her heart skip a beat all over again. We aren't finished with this conversation, Olivia, he said, his tone leaving absolutely no room for doubt. Not even close. Olivia looked up at him through her lashes, her cheek still tinged with a soft, lingering flush. Is that an order, Mr. Sinclair? The corner of Adrian's mouth twitched upward. He stepped back to the side of the bed, leaning down until his face was inches from hers, his dark gaze pinned on her lips. It's a promise, Mrs. Sinclair, he whispered against her skin, leaning in just enough to press a soft, lingering kiss to the corner of her mouth. Have breakfast. Rest. I'll be home early tonight, and we'll pick up right where we left off. Before Olivia could process the racing flutter in her chest, Adrian straightened up, adjusted his shirt, and walked toward his dressing room with a quiet, confident stride leaving her tangled in the sheets, smiling softly into the quiet morning light. The evening sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the living room in rich shades of amber and gold. Olivia sat on the edge of the plush sofa, her fingers nervously tracing the seam of her sweater. Ever since Adrian had left for his morning meeting, her heart had been running on a steady, expectant buzz. The memory of his low whisper, I'll be home early tonight, and we'll pick up right where we left off, had played on a loop in her head all day. The soft click of the front door opening broke the quiet house. Olivia stood up instantly, her breath catching in her throat as tailored footsteps echoed down the hallway. Adrian walked into the living room, stepping out of the shadows with an effortless, striking presence. But it wasn't just his sharp suit or composed stature that made Olivia stop in her tracks. In his arm, he held a massive, overflowing bouquet of deep velvet red roses, blooms so lush and fragrant that their sweet aroma immediately filled the entire room. Olivia's eyes widened, a soft gasp escaping her lips. Adrian. Adrian set his briefcase down on the entry table, his dark eyes fixed entirely on her. The heavy corporate fatigue that usually weighed on his shoulders after a day at the office was completely absent, replaced by a quiet, warm intensity. He walked straight over to her, extending the flowers. For you, he said softly, his voice low and rich. Olivia reached out, her hands brushing against his as she took the stunning arrangement. She buried her face into the delicate petals for a moment, breathing in the rich scent before looking back up at him through her eyelashes, her cheeks flushing a delicate pink. They're beautiful, she whispered, setting the roses down on the coffee table behind her. I didn't expect. I promised you we'd pick up where we left off, Adrian murmured, closing the small distance between them. Before she could respond, Adrian wrapped his broad arms around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. Olivia let out a soft sigh of complete surrender, her arms instantly winding around his neck, her fingers tangling into the soft hair at the nape of his neck. He held her tight, holding her as if the entire world outside their front door didn't exist, his heavy, steady heartbeat thumping right against her palm. Adrian leaned down, resting his forehead against hers. I couldn't focus on a single report today, he confessed against her skin, a low, quiet hum of laughter vibrating through his chest. All I kept thinking about was coming back to this. Olivia's heart did a sudden, dizzying flip. Me too, she admitted softly, her dark eyes searching his. Adrian's gaze dropped slowly to her lips. His thumb came up to rest gently against her jawline, tilting her face up as he began to lean in. Olivia's breath hitched, her eyes fluttering shut in anticipation as she felt the subtle, warm rush of his breath just millimeters from her mouth. The air between them turned electric, charged with every unspoken feeling they had carried for months. Ding dong. The loud, sharp chime of the doorbell echoed violently through the quiet house, cutting straight through the atmosphere like a blade. Both of them froze. Olivia's eyes snapped open, her heart pounding frantically against her ribs as the sudden noise shattered the moment. Adrian stayed still for a split second, his lips hovering a fraction of an inch from hers, a shadow of deep annoyance flickering across his dark eyes before he slowly pulled back. Ignore it, Adrian murmured raspy, his grip on her waist tightening just a fraction as he tried to lean back in. They'll go away. Ding dong. Ding dong. The chime rang out again, persistent, demanding, and entirely unwelcome. Olivia let out a shaky breath, her hands resting flat against his chest. Adrian, someone's at the door. They're not going away. Adrian let out a low, frustrated sigh, his jaw tightening as he reluctantly let his hand slide off her waist. Stay here, he said quietly, brushing a thumb over her cheek once more before turning toward the hallway. Olivia smoothed down her sweater, trying to quiet her racing pulse as she listened to Adrian's heavy, deliberate footsteps walking down the foyer. She heard the heavy click of the front door being pulled open. Silence stretched for a long, tense beat. Adrian, a familiar, sharp voice echoed into the hallway, a voice that sent an immediate, cold jolt straight down Olivia's spine. We need to talk. Olivia froze. Standing on the front porch, framed by the fading evening light, was Nathaniel. Olivia's heartbeat stopped. Standing on the front porch, framed by the fading evening light, was Nathaniel. He looked nothing like the man she remembered. His suit was wrinkled, his beard had grown in, and dark circles rested beneath his eyes. He looked as though he hadn't slept in days. But what caught Olivia's attention wasn't him. It was what he was holding. A single envelope. Adrian's expression immediately hardened. What do you want? Nathaniel looked past him. His eyes found Olivia. Then, he noticed the bouquet of red roses resting on the coffee table. For a brief second, pain flashed across his face. I won't take much of your time, his voice was quieter than before. I just need 5 minutes. Adrian didn't move. You have one. Nathaniel slowly stepped inside. The atmosphere instantly became heavy. Olivia remained where she was, her fingers unconsciously tightening around the edge of her sweater. Nathaniel looked at the fresh roses again before letting out a bitter laugh. I knew it. I always knew you were a better man than me. Neither of them answered. Nathaniel slowly sat down on the sofa. His exhausted eyes returned to Olivia. I came to take you home. The words landed like a stone. Olivia stared at him. I'm already home. Nathaniel closed his eyes for a second. You deserve an explanation. Silence. Before anyone could stop him, he continued. Before I started dating you, I was seeing someone named Amelia. Olivia's expression remained blank. The day before our wedding, she called me. She told me we had a 2-year-old son. Olivia felt the old wound reopen. I had a choice, Nathaniel said, his voice cracking. A child, or the woman I loved. I chose the child. I booked the first flight to Europe. He lowered his head. I know what I did to you. I know I humiliated you. I know I broke your heart. His voice trembled. But when I got there, I found out the child wasn't mine. It was all a lie. She used me for money. I came back, but I was too late. Nathaniel looked directly into Olivia's eyes. I've regretted that decision every single day. Slowly, he got down on his knees. Olivia. I'm begging you. Please forgive me. I can't live without you. Come back with me. Tears gathered in his eyes. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Olivia stood frozen. Months ago, she would have run into his arms. Months ago, these were the words she had prayed to hear. But now, her feet refused to move. She looked at Nathaniel. Then, almost instinctively, her eyes drifted toward Adrian. He hadn't said a single word. He simply stood there. Silent. His face revealed nothing. But inside, everything was falling apart. If she forgives him, she'll leave. And if she leaves, I'll lose her. For the first time in his life, Adrian was terrified. Not of losing a deal. Not of losing his company. But of losing the woman who had quietly become his home. The heavy silence in the room was suffocating. Nathaniel stayed on his knees, his hands trembling on the carpet as he waited for a response that felt like a lifetime in coming. Olivia looked at the man who had once broken her world into pieces. She looked at his tears, his ruined pride, and the desperate apology she had dreamed about for months. Yet, as she stood there, she realized something profound. The pain wasn't there anymore. The anger was gone. All that was left was an overwhelming tiredness, a deep need to breathe, and a sudden, sharp ache in her chest as her mind spun out of control. She couldn't look at Nathaniel anymore. She couldn't look at Adrian either, not when she could feel the raw, agonizing tension vibrating off his silent frame, terrified of what her next words might be. I can't, Olivia whispered, her voice barely audible. Nathaniel looked up, hope flickering weakly in his wet eyes. Olivia? I can't do this right now, she said, her voice shaking as tears blurred her vision. Without another word, without looking at either of them, Olivia turned on her heel. She walked quickly past the coffee table, past the fresh bouquet of red roses, and rushed down the long hallway. Her footsteps echoed loudly in the quiet house until the sharp sound of her bedroom door closing cut through the air, followed by the soft click of the lock. She leaned her back against the wooden door, pressing a hand over her mouth as a silent sob escaped her lips. Downstairs, the living room remained dead silent. Nathaniel slowly pulled himself up from the floor, staring at the empty hallway where she had disappeared. Adrian's posture shifted instantly. The terrifying fear in his eyes hardened into something ice-cold and absolute. Step by step, he closed the distance between himself and Nathaniel. You got your 5 minutes, Adrian said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, dark baritone that offered no room for argument. And you have your answer. Get out. Nathaniel swallowed hard, seeing the unyielding wall in front of him. Knowing there was nothing left for him here, he took a step back, turned, and walked out into the falling dusk. Adrian closed the heavy mahogany door, locking it firmly. He stood alone in the dim entryway for a long moment, staring up the stairs toward her room. His heart was still beating wildly against his ribs, heavy with the terrifying thought of what she was thinking behind that closed door. Slowly, he walked up the stairs, stopping just outside her bedroom door. He didn't turn the handle. He didn't knock aggressively. He simply leaned his shoulder against the doorframe, his voice soft, quiet, and completely vulnerable through the wood. Olivia, he whispered into the quiet house. I'm right here whenever you're ready. Adrian quietly closed the bedroom door behind him, cutting off the heavy silence of the house outside. The room was draped in soft shadows, illuminated only by the faint glow of the moonlight streaming through the sheer curtains. Olivia sat on the floor in the far corner, her knees pulled tight against her chest, her chin resting quietly on them. She hadn't cried. She had simply been sitting there, thinking, tracing the quiet shift in her heart. Adrian stood a few feet away, his broad frame tense, his hands buried deep in his trousers pockets. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, bracing himself for the fall. After a long, agonizing silence, he finally spoke, his voice low and raspy. Olivia. She slowly raised her head, her dark eyes reflecting the cool silver light of the moon. If Adrian swallowed hard, his throat tight, his pulse hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. If you want to go back to Nathaniel. His voice was terrifyingly calm, despite the catastrophic storm tearing him apart inside. I want to stop you. Olivia stared at him in utter disbelief, her lips parting slightly. You'll be free, he continued, taking a quiet, shuddering breath as if every word physically pained him to utter. I'll take care of everything. The divorce, the families, the public press. You don't have to worry about a single thing. For a few endless seconds, Olivia simply looked at him. Then, a faint, disbelieving laugh escaped her lips, sounding fragile in the quiet room. You're unbelievable. Adrian frowned slightly, the sheer agony in his dark eyes deepening. You really are. She stood up slowly, her gaze locked onto his. The most hopeless man I've ever met. He remained silent, motionless as a statue, terrified that any movement would shatter his remaining composure. Olivia walked slowly toward him, her bare feet making no sound against the plush carpet, until she was standing right in his shadow. How many sacrifices are you planning to make, Adrian Sinclair? He lowered his gaze, unable to bear the intensity of her look. First, her voice dropped into a delicate, trembling whisper. You stayed silent and buried your own heart for years because she was your brother's fiancée. Adrian's jaw tightened, his eyes shutting tight. Then you stepped into a contract marriage you never asked for, just to protect both our families from ruin. She took another step closer, closing the distance until the warmth of her breath brushed against his collarbone. And now, you're ready to throw your own heart away again? Her voice cracked, thick with emotion. Just because you think it'll make me happy? Adrian opened his eyes, dark and brimming with a raw, agonizing devotion. If that's what you want, I'll survive. Olivia shook her head softly, a tear finally escaping her lashes and trailing down her flushed cheek. No. You'll just keep pretending you survived, while dying a little more inside every single day. She held out her small hand, her tone turning suddenly firm, leaving no room for argument. The contract. Adrian looked at her hand, his brow furrowing in confusion. What? The contract, Adrian. Bring it to me. For a moment, he hesitated. Then, turning toward his adjacent study, he returned seconds later carrying the heavy black leather folder, the very document that had bound their lives together under cold terms, signatures, and legal clauses. Without saying a word, he placed it gently in her hands. Olivia opened it. She looked down at the dark ink of their signatures, the rigid rules, and the looming expiration date. A faint, breathtakingly beautiful smile touched her lips. Then, with a sharp, crisp sound that shattered the stillness of the room, she tore the first page straight down the middle. Adrian's eyes widened, his breath catching sharply in his throat. Olivia. She tore another page. And another. Within seconds, the solemn legal document lay in shredded, harmless pieces scattering across the dark floorboards. Olivia looked straight up into his dark, searching eyes, her gaze burning with an absolute, unyielding flame. There, she breathed softly. No contract. No conditions. No expiration date. She stepped even closer, pressing herself against him until only inches separated their chests. He could feel the rapid, frantic beat of her heart against his own. I'm done watching you surrender everything you love to the dark, Adrian, her voice was a trembling, tender whisper. I'm not another sacrifice for you to make. Slowly, tenderly, she raised her hands and cupped his warm, sharp jawline, her thumbs tracing his cheekbones. I'm choosing you. For the first time in his life, the thick, impenetrable walls Adrian had built around his soul completely crumbled to dust. He looked down at her as if he were a drowning man who had just been given air, as if he couldn't quite believe the angel standing in his arms was real. Are you sure? He rasped, his hands rising instinctively to hover at her waist, still afraid to touch her, afraid she might vanish. Olivia smiled radiantly through her tears. I've never been more sure of anything. She rose gracefully onto her tiptoes, slid her hands into the soft hair at the nape of his neck, and pulled him down to kiss him. This time, there was no hesitation. No distance. No lingering ghosts of the past. No business clauses between them. Adrian let out a low, shuddering exhale against her lips and wrapped his strong arms fiercely around her waist, pulling her flesh against his chest as if trying to merge their very souls. His kiss was deep, possessive, and brimming with months of unspoken longing, a silent confession of every late night he had spent watching her sleep, every silent vow he had made to protect her, and every heartbeat he had secretly dedicated to her. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and trembling, Adrian rested his forehead against hers, his eyes dark and burning as he searched her face, still terrified this was an exquisite dream. Olivia smiled, her thumb gently wiping away the trace of a tear near his eye. One more thing, she whispered. He murmured, his hand smoothing down her back, locking her against him. She slipped her arms comfortably around his waist and buried her face into the warm nook of his neck, breathing in the comforting scent of cedar and rain that belonged only to him. Remember this, she whispered softly against his skin, sending a delicious shiver down his spine. You're mine. And I'm never letting you sacrifice us for anyone ever again. Slowly, Adrian tightened his hold around her, burying his face in her soft, fragrant hair, holding her as though he had finally, after a lifetime in the cold, arrived home. For the first time since that unexpected wedding day, they weren't husband and wife because of fate or obligation. They were husband and wife by choice, bound by a love that no contract could ever define. 6 months into her pregnancy, Olivia had officially decided that Adrian Sinclair, the ruthless, terrifying CEO of Sinclair Enterprises, was actually a giant, overly protective golden retriever in a bespoke 3-piece suit. Adrian, I am carrying a baby, not a fragile glass sculpture. I can handle 3 steps, Olivia said, exasperated, as she stood near the edge of the decorated garden terrace. Adrian didn't even blink. He adjusted the cuff of his shirt with one hand while holding a plush, silk-covered cushion in the other, following 2 steps behind her like a very brooding, impossibly handsome bodyguard. The stone steps are slightly damp from the fountain mist, Olivia, Adrian replied, his deep voice carrying that deadpan, serious tone he usually reserved for high-stakes board meetings. The doctor specified 0 risk of slipping. Sitting down without lumbar support violates Section 3 of my personal safety protocol. Olivia paused, turning around to look at her husband. Her emerald silk maternity dress hugged her round, high 6-month bump beautifully. She raised an eyebrow. You have a written safety protocol? It's a 12-page document, Adrian corrected calmly, placing the cushion behind her on the garden bench with military precision. Now sit, before I lift you up and carry you back inside. You wouldn't dare. Everyone is right over there. Test me, Adrian murmured, his dark eyes sparkling with that quiet, wicked amusement that only she ever got to see. Before Olivia could argue, a chorus of familiar voices echoed from the main lawn, rescuing her from Adrian's relentless fussing. Adrian Sinclair, leave my daughter alone for 2 minutes. Olivia's mother called out warmly, bustling over in a gorgeous blush pink gown, followed closely by Olivia's father, who was wearing a proud, beaming smile. Right behind them was Olivia's younger sister, Chloe, who was already giggling helplessly into her glass of sparkling juice. Seriously, Adrian, Chloe teased, stepping up and poking Adrian's arm gently. If you hover any closer to my sister, you're going to be breathing for her next. Let the poor girl eat her appetizers in peace. Thank you, Chloe, Olivia sighed dramatically, sinking onto the comfortable cushion. Please tell your brother-in-law that I am fully capable of sitting by myself. Olivia's father chuckled, clapping a hand on Adrian's shoulder. Give him a break, girls. I was the exact same way when your mother was 6 months pregnant with you, Olivia. I wouldn't even let her carry her own purse. And it was utterly exhausting, darling, Olivia's mother added with a fond laugh, turning to adjust the collar of Adrian's suit jacket. Though I have to admit, Adrian, you make fussing look remarkably sophisticated. Adrian Sinclair. Move out of the way. Grandma Sinclair's loud, authoritative voice cut through the family chatter as she glided toward them in a vibrant purple gown, her diamond-encrusted cane clicking rhythmically against the floor. You're blocking my view of my great-grandchild. Go check on the catering. The seafood tower looks completely neglected. Adrian looked down at Olivia, ignoring his grandmother completely for a second as his thumb traced a slow, warm circle over Olivia's cheek. Will you be all right if I walk 20 feet away? I will somehow survive the immense hardship, Olivia teased, reaching up to press a sweet kiss to his jaw. Adrian's lips twitched into a genuine, soft smile. He leaned down, pressing a lingering kiss to her lips, and then much to Chloe's loud teasing and Olivia's blushing cheeks he dropped to one knee to press a quiet, gentle kiss right against the center of her rounded belly. Behave, he whispered against her dress before standing up and heading toward the main house. Honestly, watching him turn into a complete softie is the highlight of my entire year, Chloe declared, sitting down next to Olivia and leaning her head on her sister's shoulder. Who knew the icy CEO had a heart? As the family laughed together, a quiet figure stepped out from the shade of the archway near the garden edge. It was Nathaniel. He was holding a single, untouched glass of sparkling water. The sharp, arrogant edge he used to carry was completely gone, replaced by a quiet, subdued posture. He looked neat in his dark blazer, but there was a faint, lingering shadow of sorrow around his eyes, the quiet weight of a man who knew he was standing outside a world he had once thrown away. Olivia noticed him first and gave him a gentle, welcoming smile. "Nathaniel. I'm glad you came." Nathaniel took a slow, hesitant step forward, giving Olivia's parents a polite, respectful nod before looking at Olivia. He offered a small, tinged with sadness smile. "Happy anniversary, Olivia," Nathaniel said softly, his voice carrying a tender, melancholy warmth. I brought a gift for the baby. I left it on the main table inside." "Thank you," Olivia said gently. "How have you been?" Nathaniel looked at her round bump, then at her glowing, happy face, and finally over toward the house where Adrian was talking with the caterers, his dark eyes tracking back toward Olivia every 3 seconds like clockwork. Nathaniel let out a faint, dry breath, a small, bitter laugh brushing his lips. "I'm getting by. Working a lot. Trying to rebuild things." He paused, swallowing back the quiet ache in his throat. "I saw the way he looks at you, Olivia. And the way your family looks at him." He looked down at his glass, his smile turning bittersweet and full of quiet regret. "I was a fool, wasn't I?" Nathaniel whispered softly, making sure only she could hear. "I spent so long chasing a lie, and I walked away from the best thing that ever happened to me. But, seeing you like this, so loved, so protected," he swallowed hard, his eyes shining with a faint trace of unshed tears. "I'm genuinely happy for you, Olivia. Even if it stings to know I lost you forever." Olivia looked at him with genuine kindness, free of any remaining resentment. "You'll find your own peace, Nathaniel. Just give yourself time." Nathaniel nodded slowly, taking a deep breath to compose himself. "Yeah. Maybe one day." He raised his glass in a quiet, solemn toast. "Congratulations, Olivia. To you, and to Adrian." Just as Nathaniel stepped back toward the crowd, Adrian strode back down the terrace steps, holding a small plate stacked ridiculously high with fresh strawberries dipped in dark chocolate. His eyes instantly locked onto Nathaniel, his dark eyebrows pulling together into that classic, formidable CEO frown. Chloe burst out laughing from the bench. "Look out, Nathaniel. The dragon has returned with his treasure." Nathaniel couldn't help but chuckle softly despite his heavy heart, raising his hands in fake surrender as he backed away. "I'm leaving, Adrian. Don't look at me like you're going to buy out my company out of spite." "You're standing in my light," Adrian said bluntly, though the usual ice in his voice was tempered by the absolute contentment settled deep in his chest. "Happy anniversary, Sinclair," Nathaniel murmured with a nod of respect, turning and melting back into the party crowd. Adrian immediately sat down right where Nathaniel had been standing, placing the plate of chocolate strawberries firmly in Olivia's lap and sliding his strong arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his side. "He was just wishing us well, Adrian," Olivia whispered, leaning into his warmth and picking up a strawberry with a laugh. "I know," Adrian murmured, his morning raspy voice slipping low as his breath brushed against her ear. "Doesn't he mean I have to like him standing within 5 feet of my wife?" "You are completely hopeless," Olivia giggled, popping the fruit into her mouth. "No refund policy, Mrs. Sinclair," Adrian reminded her softly, his large hand coming to rest possessively over her rounded bump, feeling the tiny, energetic kick of their child beneath his palm. His dark eyes softened completely as he looked down into hers. "You tore up the contract. You're stuck with me forever." "Best decision of my life," Olivia whispered, leaning up to kiss him sweet and deep right in front of her laughing family. "Look at them." Grandma Sinclair announced proudly to Olivia's parents, waving her lace fan. A year ago they were tearing up legal papers, and now they won't even let each other breathe. Love is a hilarious, wonderful thing. Adrian ignored the laughing crowd around them entirely, burying his face into the soft crook of Olivia's neck and holding his family tight under the warm, golden glow of the evening lights.